And we're live. What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for joining. Another day, another debate review. Again, this one, Piers Morgan. This one, Natasha Hausdorff against Dave Smith on Piers Morgan. From all the clips I've been seeing of it, it seems like it was yet another 2v1, kind of like we saw with John Spencer and Mehdi Hassan. I did see somebody said a lot of people were upset that Piers was interrupting a lot. I even saw somebody did a count and said Piers interrupted a full 60 times, which might make the viewing experience pretty annoying. It's interesting, this character arc Piers Morgan is going through. I think he's tries really hard to kind of play this middle ground and try to show both sides, which I think is commendable. But as of the past month or so, he's had a flip, and I think he's whether this is something strategic he's doing for the sake of his own reputation, or if he's genuinely been woken up to the atrocities Israel's committed in Gaza, I'm not sure. Right? He may have really just understood something he otherwise didn't understand, and now he feels like he needs to go on the record and make it clear that what Israel's doing is wrong. It's also possible, and I've seen people speculate on it, that his motivation is simply that's where the trend is going, so he wants to be going with the trend. What's for certain, well, maybe not for certain, and this could be my own bias speaking, but I think that years from now, when we're talking about what Israel did in Gaza, people aren't going to be criticizing Piers for interrupting too much. I think he'll be praised for destroying a lot of these pro-Israel propagandists like he did with John Spencer. And since he's had John Spencer on, he had one of the Israeli spokespeople on who he also challenged really hard. He had Jonathan Conricus, another spokesperson, on. So he's going through his rounds, bringing on Israelis or pro-Israel people and just kind of drilling them hard. What I would say, and I guess we'll see if this is true with this episode, because he's been so hard on Israelis and the pro-Israel camp, I think he puts himself in a position where Israelis are less likely to come on his show. So he's putting himself in an interesting position, which might make it harder to have these interesting conversations. But hey, let's get the show on the road. Let's see. Let's see some comments real quick. Jonathan Buckenmeyer says Natasha won by way of being talked over with emotional ad hominem attacks by Piers. What a child, egotistical brat he was. So I have seen people share that. Yes, he interrupted her the whole time. Okay, well, I guess let's find out. Let's see. We'll have this on 1.5 speed as well. And once we finish this, we'll do some Q&A, and then we're going to take it over to Discord for a little Discord after party. And I have not, when I do these reviews, I don't watch them beforehand. You know, honestly, had I watched it beforehand, I'd be maybe a little sharper, a little more prepared, but it's double the time watching it. So we watched it live together. Okay.
If you're clearing out authority, indiscriminate, unrestrained, brutal, and criminal. The UK, France, and Canada, all allies of Israel, now say it's intolerable, unacceptable, and wholly disproportionate. Debate has moved a long way beyond Israel's right to defend itself, and is increasingly centered on whether it's committing war crimes, and whether the United States should wield its influence and power to make it stop. And in the court of public opinion, this is much about morality and humanity as it is about legal expertise. Well, my next two guests have been hugely influential advocates for either side. Dave Smith is a libertarian commentator, a comedian, and the host of the Part of the Problem podcast. Natasha Hausdorff is a barrister, international lawyer, and a passionate supporter of Israel. Well, let's welcome you both to Uncensored.
So, just real quick, I mean, this isn't the right matchup just off the start. Dave Smith shouldn't be debating Natasha. She's an attorney for international law. Dave Smith is not. Dave Smith is able to make a coherent moral argument, but I don't think he's that well versed in international law. Natasha, who I did share my thoughts about Natasha on the last stream, so happy to share it again, maybe expressing my own bias before we get into this. Natasha very much is She's just a pro-Israel propagandist. She does not approach this as an attorney for, let me try to interpret international law as honest as possible. Her role is acting more as a defense attorney for the state of Israel. Think of that relationship. The defense attorney is looking to find a defense by any means necessary. Doesn't matter what you did, the defense attorney will always be there to try to either find a loophole or find some way to interpret law that this person is absolved of whatever they've done, right? That's Natasha's role. And I want to be careful how I explain this without seeming like I'm making like just an appeal to authority here, but there's a pretty clear consensus amongst attorneys of international law about certain things that Israel has done, like the fact that the West Bank is an occupation, which was also determined in the international courts to be an occupation. There's a consensus amongst attorneys about, and scholars on genocide about what Israel's doing in Gaza. On, call it a more extreme, although this is the mainstream today, there's a consensus among scholars that this is a genocide. Many international lawyers agree. International lawyers that might not necessarily agree that this is genocide are still saying it's clearly there are war crimes being committed. Pretty much the only international lawyers you have that are saying everything Israel's doing is fine in accordance with international law happen to be either Israeli or Jewish. So again, I'm coming from a place where I'm not an attorney. I don't know, I'm not an expert in law. So I can either become an expert and read law and reach my own conclusions, but that doesn't scale. We need solutions for society to be able to understand, to be able to interpret things. That's where trust in institutions come from. Now, for good reason, we've lost a lot of our trust in institutions. But what's more plausible, just if we don't have time to become experts, that a consensus of international lawyers all seem to just have a vendetta against Israel and they're unfairly interpreting law against Israel, or that the only people who just happen to see things differently, but they're interpreting it fairly, just happen to be the select few Israeli and Jewish international lawyers. It's so much less plausible that there's some conspiracy and all these international lawyers are just interpreting it just because they hate Israel. It's much more likely that if you're Jewish or Israeli, you're going to have a certain bias and you're going to interpret international law in a way that favors the country that you love. I mean, that's pretty obvious. So Natasha falls in that category. And I'm seeing João Baptista say she isn't a lawyer for international law. Oh, is she not one by trade? Because that's how she presents herself. Interesting. So she might not even officially be a lawyer, but that's how she presents herself. But it's not there's no attempt to try to have like an objective analysis. And one way that I will challenge, one way to look at this is anybody who wants to have the legal argument, ask them one thing Israel did that's illegal the past 20 months. If they can't openly share a critique of Israel, then you know that they have no interest in being objective. Challenge them. See if they're willing to find one thing Israel did that is illegal according to international law. Natasha won't be able to tell you one thing because that's not what she's attempting to do. She's attempting to find justifications for Israel's actions. But with that, even I'm bummed that the way she got destroyed, as many are describing, is by getting interrupted, because it is not the best way to defeat somebody's arguments. But nonetheless, I'm intrigued to see how it went. But the review still, I'm going to do my best to put whatever bias I have aside and try to review this as fairly as possible, despite the fact that I am by no means a fan of Natasha. I think that she's just a propagandist, and she will be remembered as such. Anyways, with that, let's get into this.
Dave Smith, I finally lost it really with any attempt to try and defend what Israel was doing, having been a pretty steadfast defender of its right to defend itself from what happened on October the 7th. But when you launch a blockade for 3 months at an already utterly tormented civilian population who were already struggling to eat, And you can see from the scenes that we've seen in the last 48 hours that they are starving people, prepared to risk death to get their hands on meager amounts of food. When a government like Israel does that, at the same time as it's simultaneously bombarding those people night after night after night, albeit with the crucial caveat they always put in that they are targeting Hamas solely and that everything around Hamas is collateral damage. But to me, this reached a point where it became clearly disproportionate. And that's a view that clearly the UK has reached, the French have reached, many people in America have reached. You certainly haven't come to that thought process in the last few months. You've been saying that for a long time. The question I have for you, what happens though now? We are where we are. Netanyahu and his government are in charge. Nobody seems to be stopping them. What happens?
Well, that is a good question, and I don't know for sure what the answer is. By the way, it's been great to watch your evolution on this topic, Piers. It's good that you joined us. Later is better than well, never.
Yeah, just to clarify, I would say this: I don't want to join a side. Right? I was in the Middle East last week by chance. A lot of people come up to me going, "Thank you for switching sides," and I said, "I haven't switched sides. I've always tried to be a fair-minded, impartial journalist, doing the job a journalist should do, which is challenging everybody. I think I've had more guests on from both sides, actually, held more debates than any other show in the world of this kind. So, I do think it's important. I don't want to be seen as taking a side. What I feel now, though, or what I think it's important clarification, but what I think is important now is that this has gone too far. And I can see that very clearly.
Yes. Okay. So I didn't mean to box you into a side, just making the point that you have come to the conclusion that what Israel's doing is indefensible.
Sorry, guys.
And I thought it was fascinating and shocking watching you grill the Israeli ambassador, who simply cannot tell you or even ballpark how many kids they have killed in this whole thing. Yeah, look, I mean, I think what Israel, to your broader question of where does this all end up going, there's almost two kind of simultaneous wars, in a sense, that are going on. There's the actual, control of power, in which case Israel's done phenomenally well over the last couple of years. I mean, Israel still has the support of the most powerful governments in the world, damn near unconditionally, if not purely unconditionally. They've been very successful in terms of taking out Hezbollah leaders. They've been very successful in terms of destroying the Gaza Strip. They've been successful in getting the regime change that they've wanted for many years in Syria. However, simultaneously, while that's going on, global opinion has drastically changed of Israel to a degree that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. And despite whatever arguments might be made for whether this meets a genocide or doesn't meet a genocide, or whether, as two former Israeli prime ministers who have come out recently and said that war crimes are being committed, wherever you fall on that, the fact is that the debate is now over whether Israel is committing a genocide or not. And that is something that all of us should take a step back and appreciate how profound it is, especially amongst young people. In the future, I don't believe Israel will ever be viewed the same as it was by my parents' generation. And so what does that mean? As you mentioned earlier, Piers, that's right. This is a big part of how wars end, is when public support evaporates. We will see where all of this goes, but it is a very dangerous situation. And it is certainly profound to the degree that it has changed the impression of Israel on the global stage.
Yeah.
So, this is an interesting point, because many still speculate on what Hamas tried to achieve on October 7th. And we've heard people speculate that it was to disrupt the Abraham Accords and stop normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And there might be truth to that, but it's purely speculative. I haven't seen evidence to actually suggest that. Could be. But it's not like Hamas thought that they could actually destroy Israel on October 7th. That wasn't their intention. One other suspected motivation was to essentially invite Israel in, right? Commit such a horrific act that Israel will respond with the aggression they're currently responding, and that will change public sentiment against Israel. If that was their goal, then they've been successful. Even if Hamas gets defeated, which seems that they're still not close to being defeated, but even if they do, they still very well may have gotten a multi-generational victory. That is one way to look at it. But yeah, let's continue.
Natasha, if I was an Israeli, a regular Israeli, I would be pretty concerned that people like me have come to the place we've come to in this debate. I've been harangued by pro-Palestinians for a long time for being too supportive of Israel's right to defend itself. Harangued, abused, mocked, threatened, all of the things that come with that in a war. But I just felt I couldn't do anything else to speak out. When you launch a 3-month blockade against a people already suffering in the way that these Palestinians have been suffering, and I'm not talking about Hamas, I'm talking about the innocent civilians in Gaza. It's a population of 2 million, with half of them under 18. More than 20,000 children have been killed, even if the UK ambassador has no idea what that number is, but knows exactly how many Hamas terrorists have been killed, oddly. I would just be concerned, if I was an average Israeli, that people that supported us after the horrors of October the 7th are now beginning to go against, certainly in my case, the Israeli government, not the people of Israel, not Jewish people. They will always have my support. But this Israeli government is out of control. We saw and heard from the words of Smotrich last week, the finance minister, a very clear mission statement to clear out all the Palestinians from Gaza. That is a form of genocide, whatever You're a lawyer. You'll probably tell me it doesn't meet the exact legal criteria of the word genocide. But if you're clearing out an entire people based on their ethnicity from where they live, that to me and most people around the world who don't have a horse in this race is a form of genocide. What do you say to that?
Well, Piers, I'm particularly glad of the opportunity to come on, not before time, and address so much of this misinformation, which seems to be at the core, not just of your shift, but what is a marked shift in the public discussion of this topic. And it is, of course, because of the abuse, the haranguing, the mockery, and the threats and the intimidation that so many people are falling into the easy line.
Well, that's not why I've changed my mind.
Well,
I don't give a damn about who threatens me or how they threaten me or how they mock and abuse me. I was getting all that long before this war. So I get it on pretty much any debate I ever had. That's fine. I'm a big boy. So please don't misconstrue anything that I have done in terms of a pivot in the way I view this with anything to do with being threatened into it, bullied into it, or cajoled into it, because that would be ridiculous.
Because you've been clear that this is because of the change in the narrative around this. And I hope I'll have the opportunity, and you'll allow me the opportunity to address some of this false information. And there is a great deal of it. It starts with this notion that Israel imposed an entire blockade on aid, which is being put forward without the context of the fact that in the hostage release deal, which preceded it immediately, there were over 25,000 trucks of aid that were facilitated into the Gaza Strip by Israel. The estimates that I have seen is that that should have been a stockpile of between 5 to 6 months of food and humanitarian assistance. Some estimates are in the region of 8 months. Where did that aid go? That is the question I would expect reasonable people without an agenda here to be asking. Where did that aid go if all of the...
So right now she's basing her argument of estimate. She should be challenged on where that estimate has come from. I don't think there's any basis to that. In fact, I mean, somebody, what's his name? Avi Bitterman. He's Avi Bitterman on Twitter. He did an analysis. He's a doctor, a pro-Israel doctor. He did an analysis that they had something like 4 months, and he has, this is a pro-Israel doctor put out this analysis. For her to say 6 to 8 months, based on what? Based on who? Like who's saying this? And also, you can't only measure aid going in. You need to see that there's means of distribution. If you destroyed the supply chain and you destroyed the roads and you stopped nations' ability to produce their own food, it's not only about trucks going in. It's about how that's distributed. So this isn't the only thing you need to look at. But that estimate she's giving, I'd be interested in seeing where she got it from, because I haven't seen anything of that sort. And by the way, I did mention, Zhao, you said that she's not even an international lawyer, but I did look it up. She's international law expert, and she's a member of pro-Israel lobbying group UK Lawyers for Israel. So that's what her official Wikipedia says, I guess.
Reasonable people without an agenda here to be asking, where did that aid go if all of these claims of starvation are to be taken seriously? The reality here is that there is no Israeli-imposed starvation on the Gaza Strip, that there has been facilitated over the course of this war.
But that is simply not true. I'm sorry.
Well,
no, hang on. If you've ever felt like you're being watched on...
Yeah, I mean, again, essentially, this is the argument, and it's so disingenuous. Saying Israel let in enough aid, someone stole the aid, it must have been Hamas. Okay, well, that's not our problem. But if you've destroyed the supply chain and you've destroyed a nation's ability to produce their own food, it's your responsibility to let in enough aid that you don't have an issue with overinflated prices and theft. The way to do that is to flood Gaza with aid. If people are stealing aid to sell it, well, then that means that there's a supply and demand issue. So flood Gaza with aid, and you won't have people monetizing it. There should be so much aid in Gaza that food is dirt cheap and nobody can monetize it. This doesn't justify continued starvation. Anyways. And Natasha, she's considered the best and the brightest that they've got. And also, I want to make it clear, so much of how we view somebody as being bright is connected to their accent. If Natasha said the same shit with a Southern accent, no one would think she's sophisticated. It's the British accent carries a lot of weight here.
Online, it's unfortunate because you're using more. App redirects 100% of your online traffic through secure servers. No data brokers, no point scours. The PC work we're showing on the screen. Israeli government, let me phrase that correctly. When the Israeli government ordered 3 months ago a blockade of food and aid going into Gaza.
Yes.
That is a deliberate state-sponsored form of starving a populace.
No, it is not, because
That's exactly what happened. That's why they look like they're starving. That's why they're risking death
Piers, you've asked me
to
on
get
here.
to scrabbling bits of food.
Forgive me. You've asked me on here to answer these questions. And
I can challenge you.
And I just explained that blockade, which was imposed in order to prevent Hamas continuing to fuel its war machine by selling additional aid, that it was diverting, and we'll come on to the way that diversion is going to be prevented in the future, I hope. But the fact of the matter is that this blockade was instituted in the context of there being 5 to 6 months, maybe even 8 months of aid that was facilitated into the Gaza Strip. And throughout, if you'll allow me to finish this point, throughout the war, the volume of aid that Israel has facilitated into Gaza, and this is not being reported by the international media, but it is available, publicly available information published by COGAT, over 1,700,000 tons of aid which has been facilitated into the Gaza Strip, which is more than required for the civilian population. The study that was conducted.
Why are they so hungry then?
The study that was conducted.
Why are they so hungry?
May I finish this point and I'll come on to answer your
Why are they so hungry?
Well,
why are they stampeding over each other, risking death to get at scraps of food? I don't understand. If they're all so well nourished and Israel's behaved so impeccably properly in terms of supplying enough food for months on end, why do they all look like they're starving to death and are prepared to risk actually dying to get at food?
What you are basing your assessment on, I'm afraid.
It's what I'm seeing with my own eyes.
Which is Hamas propaganda, which you must accept as
No, it's actually footage. I'm watching news footage.
Yeah, okay. I mean, this is the MO. You got to feel bad for Natasha because essentially, like, if you're the defense attorney of somebody who's very obviously a psychopath and you need to go on the record defending their conduct, I mean, good luck. Good luck. So the fact that there's people being killed at these aid sites and there's riots, that's not Hamas propaganda. I mean, this is, we have videos of this being the case. Israel acknowledged now, first denied, but now acknowledged to opening fire near these aid points. There's nothing Hamas propaganda about that. There's nothing. And one of the tactics that you'll see in the Hezbollah camp, it's very much to take any pro-Palestine argument and then attribute it to Hamas propaganda, to the point where they're now saying free Palestine is the new Heil Hitler. You see that, like, that's how they're trying to frame it, that there's no way to be pro-Palestine, pro-human rights without being pro-Hamas. It's a dishonest framing that's being done by the Hezbollah camp. And, it's important to call it out for what it is. It's a bullshit argument, and it's a dishonest way to engage with people. There's nothing Hamas propaganda about what Piers said, that there's hungry people in Gaza and malnutrition has set. Children have died already from malnutrition, primarily those who needed special nutrition needs because they had some pre-existing conditions, but these children did start passing away. Also, there's when you're malnourished, your wounds don't heal as fast. So there could be indirect deaths that are hard to attribute to malnutrition. Somebody bleeding out from shrapnel, for example, or from infection because of the collapse of the healthcare system, but that could be contributed to by the fact that people are malnourished. So all these need to be taken into account. But right, this is the difference. If you're like a researcher, analyst, and an honest commentator, you should try to understand all this nuance. If you're a propagandist, you just need your lines. You're like, Hamas stole aid, that's Hamas propaganda, we're done. Now, another thing, and y'all might be very surprised to hear this, there's actually never been evidence of Hamas stealing aid. Certainly not on a systemic level. It's so many of the claims we hear about Hamas, and I hate that the propagandists constantly make me seem like I'm defending Hamas, because I despise Hamas, but I have no love for Hamas, but I have a deep love for truth. And I think lying in order to justify killing people is a pretty horrendous lie. So that's where a lot of the motivation for this pushback comes from. But it's never been demonstrated that they're stealing and selling aid. What is possible, perhaps even plausible, is that members of Hamas, as well as other militias in Gaza, which we've heard reports of, are stealing and then reselling aid, but nothing on a systemic level, like this is a policy of Hamas. We've seen nothing that it's widespread to the point where it could actually help them fund their operations. None of that has ever been demonstrated. It's just a claim that many accept as truth with no basis whatsoever. And again, if you don't want Hamas to be able to sell aid, then you flood Gaza with aid. That's the solution. You don't starve the population. If you stop aid from coming in, Hamas most likely has aid stored. The young children and elderly are going to die from malnutrition before Hamas does. You're not starving them. You're starving the people. So it's just, it's not a coherent argument. And it's an argument, again, to justify the the starvation of a civilian population.
Of thousands of people fighting with each other to get at food, some of whom ended up dying, some of whom ended up being shot. The IDF says it wasn't them and it was Hamas.
Sorry.
We don't know who did it because, as you know, the Israeli government has banned all international journalists from being anywhere near this to verify what is actually happening.
Piers Morgan, you're not allowing me to answer a single question.
I am.
No,
and then when you say something that I don't agree with, I'm challenging
I'm
you.
sure I'm going to say a lot that you don't agree with because, unfortunately, your assessment is being based on misinformation, like these false reports we've had today of Israel shooting 31 Palestinians attempting to get to food. That was run, and Ambassador Mike Huckabee has criticized this resoundingly in a statement just now. That was run in the context of the Associated Press, CNN, many media outlets, and it was entirely false because it is, as has been the case previously.
Well, hang on. The Israeli government says it was entirely false. What we have had, sorry, just to...
and since then they've acknowledged to shooting. So this is the MO: deny, and then if you have to, you admit. If you can deny because you maintain plausible deniability, you will. But if you can't, then you admit after the fact. But Natasha's way of knowing what's true, for it's very simple. What Israel says is true. What Hamas says is false. That's her framework from understanding true and false, just so we're clear.
It's not just the Israeli
Sorry to
government.
jump in again.
No, it's also the Gaza Humanitarian
Israel has
Foundation.
done one of its own reports because journalists aren't allowed to verify this independently. So Israel investigates itself and has decided it did nothing
I'm
wrong.
not referring to Israel's
Hang on. What we do know is that a number of doctors and hospital spokesmen and charity spokesmen have all said that there were many people killed and many more people wounded taken to hospitals, and they saw the bodies and they saw the wounded. So somebody was killing and wounding a lot of Palestinians. You say it was Hamas. Hamas say it was the IDF. We, the international media, cannot verify this because Israel doesn't allow us in to do our job.
That's not why this reporting has been conducted on such a false basis. It's because nothing coming out of the Gaza Strip is able to be reported without Hamas control. And you, as part of the international media peers, will know this.
I also know that historically, Israel has accepted that the health authorities' numbers, historically, before October the 7th, that they have been broadly accurate. That is the historical position.
You must also know that the assessments of Hamas casualty figures by experts and statisticians have found them to be preposterously inaccurate, fabricated.
Well,
Yeah, for those who watch this channel know that this has been my area of research. Statisticians and experts have not found flaws in these numbers. Propagandists who have been looking for flaws find very minor margin of error that you'll always find when you have 53,000 lines of data. The Ministry of Health data they release, I'm not talking about daily reporting. I'm talking about the list they release every few months that has the names and ID numbers of all those killed. That is a public list that anybody can review. It's been under immense public scrutiny, and there's been no fraud found in this list, none whatsoever. Again, the people who are authoring this work, none of them have ever agreed to a public discussion or debate on this topic. I've been reaching out to all of them. They all deny because they know that the work they're putting out is complete bullshit. Natasha, though, for that is what she knows to be true. But no, there's been no fraud found in MOH list. Israel relies on those numbers. They historically relied on them, like Piers said, but a whistleblower acknowledged that they still rely on them in a report released a few months ago. And Israel has access to the Palestinian population registry, so it could verify these names and ID numbers. It's just bullshit. There's no basis to what she's saying. And this is one of the challenges. I don't think neither Dave nor Piers fully understand Ministry of Health data. Like, they just don't know. So I don't think there's going to be proper pushback here, but let's see.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you what else.
No, you're not allowing me to finish a single
I can
answer.
actually conduct this interview any way I like.
Well, then the viewers aren't going to get any benefit of
the viewers can make their own mind up about what they're hearing and seeing. When I interviewed the UK ambassador to the UK,
yes,
she was able to tell me definitively that 30,000 Hamas terrorists had been killed.
I think it was an estimate, let's be clear.
But she had absolutely no idea, estimate or otherwise, how many children had been killed in the process. Do you know?
There's a very simple logical explanation for that, which is Israel is targeting Hamas and Palestine.
Do you know how many children Israel's killed in the process?
There is a very simple explanation for the reason that we do not know. Because
you only count the terrorists you killed, not the children? Well, I just ask you, just to be clear, are you saying that the IDF only counts?
Yeah, I mean, Piers obviously is interrupting her. He's bullying her. Natasha is so wrong. Let her be wrong on full display. Let her speak. Let her be wrong, and then challenge it. The interrupting, all it does is really give Natasha supporters an opportunity to not even focus on the merit of the arguments, but just focus on the fact that Piers is interrupting, and then they just say it was an ambush rather than an actual debate. So it's just not the right strategy to change minds or to have a debate, and it's going to make pro-Israel people less likely to want to engage with him.
bodies of terrorists it kills, not innocent children.
The IDF has not been, and this is a shift now, as you will have heard from Jonathan Conricus, has not been in control of any significant part of Gaza to be able to conduct that analysis.
So how does it know how many terrorists it's killing?
Because it is striking them with clear intelligence and targeting those strikes deliberately.
So it counts the bodies of the terrorists, but not the children it kills in the process.
It counts, I'm sorry, this is perfectly logical.
It's actually not logical at all.
It counts.
To anyone watching this, they're thinking, what on earth are these Israelis saying? Firstly, Ambassador, now what you're saying is that you only count the terrorists that are killed. You don't count the children that are killed in the process of killing the terrorists.
Perhaps
so which begs the question,
no, I can provide you with some additional analysis.
Why?
If you'll allow me to answer the question, I'll provide you with some additional analysis, which is in relation to the casualty ratios that have been projected.
How do you know the ratios?
I'll explain. The casualty ratio throughout the first period of the war, phase 1, was generally put at between 1 to 1 and 1.5 to 1. I'll explain.
Okay, I want to hear her explanation. There's no basis to the 1 to 1, none.
Since then, in phase 2, because of a very different type of fighting that we're now seeing, there are some estimates that it may have gone up to 2 to 1.
How do you know?
Very simply.
She's wrong again. The first phase was far more deadly. The civilian to combatant ratio in phase 1 was numbers we haven't seen. I mean, the first 3 weeks were by far the most deadly. It hasn't gotten worse since then. It's likely gotten better. So again, that's just not true.
That Israel has been able to establish.
How do you know if you're not counting?
May I answer the question?
Well, you're not counting the civilians you're killing. So how do you know the ratio?
Well, if you're not going to allow me
to
talk
about logic. Let me go. I want to bring Dave. I don't know.
Let me
speak for a long time. Dave is.
Haven't,
well, I have.
You see, that's a bummer. I really want to hear her logic how they reached 1 to 1, because you need to engage in some like serious misrepresentation of data to make that case. And it's not defensible. It's only defensible if you're making the claim and don't need to then defend it. Like, you could make it seem like this is true using misrepresentation of data, but like take anybody making this claim and have them debate, or just even a good faith discussion of somebody who's done the research. It's not a defensible position to hold, but it's a bummer that Piers isn't letting her explain.
I'll let you speak again. We've got plenty of time here.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. But it's my show. I'm going to go to Dave. Dave, I'm told I'm lacking logic here. Is there anything logical about what we're hearing about how they apparently know the exact ratio of terrorists they're killing to civilians, but they don't know how many civilians they're killing? How do you know the ratio?
Piers, it's just too ridiculous. And as you know, Piers, and look, I know that you've been, I think, very, as you've said before, I don't want to put you on either side of this debate, because I think actually people who are hardcore on either side of this debate probably see you as someone on the other side.
Yeah, they all hate me. The extremists all hate me.
No, not all. I didn't mean to say they all hate you.
They actually do. They actually do. The ones who are to the extremities on both sides, they all hate me. So that's fine. Tax day has passed, but for millions of Americans, not too surprised.
It's the very beginning of this conflict, is that the Israelis, including the highest levels of the Israeli government, they just speak out of both sides of their mouth the whole time. And so it's like, which argument are we even taking on? I mean, they'll sit here and say from the very beginning that the goal is just to get the hostages back and to defeat Hamas, while their finance minister is openly talking about how the goal is to cleanse the entire strip.
He's not even hiding it. He says it. He literally says it in front of the world.
Yes. And we see them now putting this into plans into action to do this. So how are we to judge this? They'll sit here and say that.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a good point that, and I mentioned this on last stream, but the conversations happening within Israeli society, they're not being shy about their aspiration to ethnically cleanse Gaza, and they're not being shy about saying that there's no civilians in Gaza, including children. You have the Western Zionists are playing defense, but those within Israeli society, it's just, they're like, you don't hear talk on the news about civilian to combatant ratio, civilians killed. That's very rarely spoken about. It's just not of interest. So while Natasha and many others are doing this defense, you turn on the Israeli media, listen to what politicians are saying, you're given a very different story. Now, in terms of the amount of combatants that Israel has killed, I mean, there's just, it's just Israel's word for it. We have a lot of reason, though, to believe that that number is highly inflated. One is that if Israel doesn't need to prove their claim, why wouldn't they inflate it? They want not only their own society, but also the world to believe that the war is going well, and the more militants they killed, it plays in their favor. So if they don't need to prove their claim, you could see a clear incentive for them to want to inflate it. That's just on a level of incentives. Secondly, generally in armed combat, you have around 2 injuries for each death. Well, then you're talking about 30,000 killed and then another 60,000 injured. I mean, that's it. There's no more militants. That's more than the entire militant population in Gaza. And also, I mean, we've seen now a few times IDF whistleblowers, I think on 2 occasions now, they've come out and explained how they're counting militants, and they'll have these no-go zones, areas that are supposedly evacuated, but they're never close to being fully evacuated. I think in a good instance, 80% leave, 20% stay. So depending on the unit, the more extreme units will say anybody you see in a no-go zone should be shot on sight. In fact, we have a commander explicitly saying this on video to his troops. And then called the more moderate units will just shoot any man thinking they're a combatant. So the whistleblower reports have said, we'll just shoot anybody who we see in these no-go zones. It could be a boy, it could be a man. They almost rarely have weapons, but they're all counted as combatants. I mean, this was explicitly explained by, now on 2 occasions, IDF whistleblowers. Not to mention, when we look at the data of those killed, there's not 30,000 military-age men on that list. Now, this on its own doesn't mean all too much, because it's possible combatants, not only possible, it's plausible combatants aren't being added to the list to the same extent civilians are, or they're not being added at all. But so then essentially you have this list of 53,000 names, and then supposedly Israel has an estimate of another 30,000 names of people they've killed, but we don't know who they are. We don't know what their names are. It's just Israel saying so. That should be taken with a very heavy grain of salt. But again, so Natasha and many others, Israel says something, we believe it to be true despite it not being verifiable. The MOH releases data, we believe it to not be true, even though it is verifiable, right? That's how they go about things. I'm hearing somebody saying audio keeps cutting out. Is anybody else having this issue? Please let me know. And for now, we will continue.
They've taken painstaking efforts to make sure that they limit the number of civilians that are killed, while also saying they have no idea how many civilians are being killed, and they don't count the number because that's not who they're targeting. You'll sit here and say, we're only targeting Hamas, or that we're only intentionally targeting Hamas. And at the same time, think about the argument they're even making, as Smotrich is out bragging about how not one grain of wheat will get into Gaza for this 3-month period that you're referring to. But they'll say, hey, look, they have stockpiles of aid that had gone in there previously. It's like, okay, Piers, so then logically, can't we deduce you're not starving Hamas? They've got plenty of food. Then who is the additional blockade supposed to impact? It's the civilian population. And so, listen, I'm sorry, this is just anybody with just common sense and a basic understanding of logic could tell you that none of these defenses make any sense. And instead, I think it's reasonable for us to say that we're going to judge the Israeli government, and I like that you were precise about that. We're talking about the government of a foreign country, not people who believe in Judaism across the world, and not even necessarily the people of that country. But when I'm judging the Israeli government, I'm sorry, I'm going to judge them based off what their actions are, and I'm going to judge them based off what their motives are when they admit the truth.
Yeah.
And so you could sit here and say, oh, we're doing everything we can to prevent the number of children dying, and then brag about the ratio, but at the same time tell me you don't even know the number of children who are dying. The bottom line here, and this is why global opinion is turning against Israel, is the level of human suffering that is being inflicted by Israel on the people of Gaza is evil. It is pure freaking evil, and it doesn't need to be done this way. And if you think you can get away with this with a decentralized media and with smartphones and with 4K high def images and with the ability through social media today for people to communicate in a non-controlled environment, good freaking luck, man. This is going to end up so bad for everyone. It's already ended up so bad for the poor people of Gaza. But I just can't. I'm truly stunned, Piers, and I'm sure you are too. I am stunned by the lack of rational self-preservation on the part of the Israelis. Like, read the room here. You are turning the entire world against you, and I do not understand why they would choose to do this.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, Dave Smith, despite him like not being an expert, he makes just pretty clear, straightforward, sensible arguments. You don't need to be an expert to make these arguments. 2 things I wanted to comment on, because they didn't let Natasha explain the ratio, but the way they get the ratio, it's ridiculous. So she said you can't trust MOH data, but the way they take the ratio is they take MOH data as is, they assume it to be true, and then they reduce the number of combatants killed from the total number the MOH is saying. So first they say it's fake or overinflated, but then they use it for their analysis of 1-to-1, which kind of reminds me of what Dave said about speaking out of both sides of their mouth. He talks about Israel's lack of self-preservation. So being Israeli, living half the year in Israel, interacting with a lot of Israelis, it's very hard. It's very hard to be introspective and reflective and see your own faults and flaws and even see how others perceive you, especially when you're traumatized or in a fearful state of mind. So the Israeli population believe that this is an existential war. They believe that this is set. We need to defeat Hamas to ensure we can survive. That's how many view it. Most Israelis are not thinking rationally and are unable to recognize the legitimacy of any criticism aside from just attributing it to anti-Semitism, which is unfortunate. But again, when I try to make sense of why Israelis struggle to read the room, I think it's really they're just very much convinced that the room is wrong, right? It's kind of like the world won't look out for us. They never do. There's a double standard against us. Well, whether this is true or not, this is how they say it. There's a double standard against us. The world hating us, that's to be expected. They're anti-Semitic. We need to do what's best for us. So what Dave is explaining, their self-preservation, Israelis think they're acting in accordance to their self-preservation, very much so. That is what motivates them. They're not convinced by what Dave is saying, that the world is turning against you. You likely need the world to survive. Read the room. It's just, it doesn't really register. That's not how most Israelis see it.
I was editor of the Daily Mirror 20 years ago when we launched a long campaign to stop this country, the UK, going to war in Iraq, which I thought was an illegal invasion of a sovereign country. And it may be very unpopular with the then Labour government led by Tony Blair, because we were the Labour-supporting newspaper. My point being, my argument then was not with the people of the United Kingdom. My argument was with the government of the United Kingdom making a decision which I felt was illegal and wrong, probably constituting war crimes.
And yeah, this is a general theme between Dave and Piers that they deserve credit for. Focus on governments, institutions, systems, criticize, even demonize. Don't worry your time and frustration with people. People respond to their environments. They're convinced by their media, by their school system, by their experience. You don't change a people by hating them or by being angry at them for whatever worldview they've adopted as a result of the environment they grew up in. Change the institution, change the system, you change the people. So those who watch the show know that's a reoccurring theme, but I do want to give credit to them for emphasizing that.
And it turned out to be a complete unmitigated disaster that led to 20 more years of mayhem in the Middle East, including the rise of ISIS and all the hell that they brought with them. So this, just to be clear again, I do not have an argument with Jewish people or with Israelis. I totally understand why after October the 7th, so many people in Israel felt so vulnerable, felt so angry, felt so distressed, so heartbroken by the devastating loss. 250 odd people kidnapped and taken hostage, including babies and Holocaust survivors. Over 1,200 people murdered, 7,000 wounded, by 3,000 terrorists breaking over a border to attack anyone they got their hands on. I don't need reminding of what happened that day. That is why I defended Israel's right to defend itself so staunchly. But I cannot defend what is happening now. What is happening now is militarily inexplicable to most people I've spoken to in the military. I have a lot in my family. Nobody understands what Israel's goal is here, other than flattening Gaza and kicking off. Well, hang on, as Smotrich has said, it is to take over and clear out Gaza of all the Palestinians. That is genocide, isn't it? Unless, I mean, you're a lawyer, you tell me.
Israel's war aims have been clear from the outset, which is the destruction of Hamas
they haven't
and
done
the return
that.
of the hostages. Well, because the war's not over yet.
You haven't done either of those things. All you're doing is killing more and more civilians, and you've been starving them.
Well, but who's you? Forgive me. I'm here as a lawyer.
The Israeli government, and you're here to defend it, right?
No, I'm here to defend the rule of law and the weaponization of international law, which has been consistent throughout this process. The propaganda that we're discussing right now, which is clearly what has shifted your position and perspective on this,
what do you mean by
is deeply
propaganda?
dangerous. Calling Israel a committer of genocide or saying that it is starving children.
Well, actually, the people alleging that Israel's committing war crimes are two former Israeli prime ministers.
Who have their own political agendas here.
How convenient. The two former prime ministers of the country
Yes.
have said that you are committing, as a government, not you, but the government is committing war crimes, and you dismiss it as just a bit of internal politics.
Well, no, it's a very serious matter that the misinformation that I would like to be able to come on to address is now also being propagated by two very sore individuals. Prime Minister Olmert, because he also served a prison sentence, and has had his entire proposed peace framework, that of essentially creating a Palestinian state in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, turned upside down by the realization, and he hasn't had, unfortunately, the temerity after the 7th of October to recognize the risk that he would have put Israel to in light of the Hamas takeover.
And when you see,
so right here, like Olmert, former PM of Israel, is coming out saying Israel's committing war crimes, and in her mind, there's no way any rational human being can reach that conclusion unless there's some ulterior motive. Like, she's trying to attribute motive to Olmert, seeing what is abundantly clear to most people.
So, and when you see, Natasha,
I was answering the previous question.
Okay,
Yes,
but let me just, on the point of legality, actually it's very productive. On the point of legality, only last week the Israeli government announced new settlements, 22 settlements.
Well, no, can we pause?
Well, hang on.
Yes.
On the West Bank, 22 settlements, which the international community views as illegal. They announced 22 new settlements. As a lawyer, given your adherence to the point of law, presumably you would condemn that.
Well, this is exactly why we need to be clear about how international law applies and why the notion of these so-called illegal settlements is a misnomer.
You don't think they are?
It's not a legal term, it's a political term, and it is part and parcel of a misapplication of international law to the status of the territory. These blood libels, occupation, ethnic cleansing,
wow, so you think the settlements are not illegal?
And genocide are all...
She's so fucking annoying. That's so fucking annoying. Saying apartheid, genocide, and ethnic cleansing, this is not blood libel. Guys, my Jewish brothers and sisters, we need to stop weaponizing accusations of anti-Semitism to defend Israel. Okay? Israel has killed a higher rate of children since October 7th than any other government in the 21st century when we account for duration and population size. Okay? We should be able to describe this clearly without being accused of being anti-Semitic. That's not blood libel. That's truth. And we should be able to talk about truth. And to say that occupation is somehow blood libel, no. There's not only is that a consensus amongst international lawyers, but it was ruled by the ICJ to be illegal. But we see Natasha is not trying to understand international law objectively. She's a defense attorney for the state of Israel. Not officially, but that's how we should be looking at this. For her, no, 22 settlements, it's not illegal. That's just a matter of interpretation. And if you dare say that it is an occupation, if you dare agree with the consensus of international lawyers on this matter, that's blood libel. Think about that. Think about that framing. And not only does this fuel anti-Semitism, I mean, people do not take accusations of anti-Semitism seriously anymore. The word has been diluted to absolute meaningless. It has no meaning anymore.
All part and parcel of the propaganda, which I would like to be able to come on to, because all of the evidence goes in completely the opposite direction in terms of Israel's compliance with the laws of armed conflict and its in the amount of steps that Israel takes, unprecedented in the history of armed conflict. And military
actually, that's just a load of bullshit. I'm sorry, it just is.
Which other army?
It just is. Which other war in recent times have you had half the population is under 18 and you killed 20,000 kids?
Those figures are Hamas figures that you are constantly
give me an example of where this morality has been played out elsewhere.
Well, I was explaining earlier that the Hamas figures are inflated, that there are internal inconsistencies.
How convenient for you. You don't know what the figures are, so how do you know?
Because there have been independent studies.
How do you know how many figures are inflated or otherwise? You don't know how many have been killed.
Because you know Hamas lies. It is an internationally prescribed terrorist organization.
Some might think you're lying because you say on one hand, I don't know how many children have been killed, but on the other hand, and that's a blood libel if you say we've killed any of them, but on the other hand...
That's not what I said, no.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you know all about the ratios and you know how humane the Israeli forces are being, but you don't know how many they're killing.
Because even on Hamas figures, which we know to be false, which do not make distinctions...
You don't know that.
Not only do we not know them to be false, we can... And I want to make something clear. There's the Gaza Media Office, the GMO, their reports should not be trusted. They're reporting something vastly different from the Ministry of Health. When we sometimes have heard people say 73% of those killed have been women and children, this is a claim made by the GMO. This is not supported by the data released by the MOH. But we don't have any reason to believe that the MOH data is inflated. We have reason to believe that it's deflated because they're not including indirect deaths. And there's still people unaccounted for, buried under rubble. So the 53,000 number is an undercount, not an overcount. And again, the list has been under immense public scrutiny. Nobody's come up with anything of value to discredit them.
How do you know they're false? You don't know how many have been killed.
Because Hamas has even itself revised those figures down and acknowledged that they are false. And the UN is still touting...
Right, exactly. So this is one of the propaganda things that Eisenberg and Andrew Fox put out, that Hamas revised the figures. What is she referring to? So in the last list that was updated, there were some corrections made. There were some people removed from the list. Some were removed and then added back in. You have 53,000 lines of data, 53,000 people. The way they collect this, the majority of the data is collected through the hospital system, essentially like through the morgue. You have somebody killed from violent deaths, it's recorded. You then have family reporting. A family member can report the death of a loved one. The MOH decided to adopt this method of reporting because the hospitals are overwhelmed and people aren't bringing their loved ones to hospitals. So they allowed for family reporting. When they allowed for family reporting, they acknowledged explicitly that every report that comes from family will need to be reviewed. So they added them to the list, but they acknowledged this is going through a verification process. In the new list, they removed some of the names that they could not find strong enough evidence that they were killed violently. They think some may have died from natural causes, so they removed names. The MOH, in doing so, made a real effort to make their data more accurate. If they had any intention to inflate the numbers, why would they remove names? This is something nobody has answered yet. Why are they removing names to reduce the number if their intention is to inflate the list? There's no logical explanation for that. Additionally, when you look at the demographics removed from the list, it's not like they only removed women and children from the list. Some of the people removed from the list are also military-age men. So again, you could see that there's kind of this like Hasbara propaganda camp, and they just share information, and that's their accepted truth. But again, there's no basis for this, and it's unfortunate that neither Dave or Piers know this to challenge her on it. Milo, you're asking whatever. I'm going to do Q&A at the end, Milo, so we'll get there.
How many children has Israel killed?
If we go back to the question, if you go back to the ratio, but I can tell you the ratio even on the basis of Hamas figures.
You can tell me the ratio without, but how do you know if you don't know how many have died?
I can tell you the ratio even on the basis of the full Hamas figures.
You have no idea how many have been killed, but you can tell me the ratio.
I can tell you the ratio.
You're a smart lawyer. Do you not understand how ridiculous that sounds? If we were in a courtroom now, you would be demolished by a fellow lawyer. They would say, what are you talking about?
Piers, this is not how courtroom etiquette is conducted, I'm afraid. I would be
actually, some of my favourite lawyers conduct them exactly like this.
I would be permitted to finish a sentence. The reason we can say that the ratio before the ceasefire was 1 to 1 or 1.15 to 1 is on the basis even of Hamas figures.
1 to 1 or 5 to 1? Which one was it?
1 to 1 to 1.5 to 1. At different points in that period, those were the two separate estimates.
Studies show that strength.
Right. So look, even based on Hamas estimates, so that's what they do. They take Hamas estimates, which they say are inflated, but they say, but if we acknowledge it to be true, then it's 1 to 1. Think about how, just at face value, think about how little this claim makes sense. The average in urban warfare is 2 to 1. Okay. But we know that Gaza is more densely populated. We know that Israel is engaging with a level of proportionality, unlike which we've seen in other conflicts. We've seen them do much far greater levels of infrastructural damage than any relative conflict. Gaza is very densely populated. You haven't had proper evacuations. These are all factors that make the fighting conditions in Gaza more challenging, where you would expect that the civilian to combatant ratio is going to be above the global average. What people are claiming, like Natasha, that despite all the evidence we have of an unprecedented level of aggression on Israel's part and no evacuations, that somehow it's less than half of the global average, doesn't make any sense. There's no reason to think that that would be the case. And again, she's saying it's 1 to 1, even if we use Hamas. So she's essentially implying if Hamas numbers are inflated, she's saying you've had more combatants killed than civilians. That's essentially what she's implying. But there's no basis for that. And when all is said and done, I think it's reasonable to estimate that the civilian to combatant ratio in Gaza is going to be the highest in the 21st century. Unless we want to compare it solely to genocides, and then you'll find things worse. You're not going to find wars and armed conflict that have a higher civilian to combatant ratio than Israel. You just won't. So while propagandists frame it as the best in history, it's actually the worst, at least in the 21st century. What their narrative is compared to what the truth is are just worlds apart. And our institutions are partially responsible for propagating these lies.
Strength training burns more fat than carbs. Perfect tool. The Jacked Up Power Rack Pro is the ultimate all-in-one home gym system for a full body workout. And you can do it in your spare room or garage. I'm delighted to say I now have one myself. So if you're new to strength training, there is a whole library of full body video workouts. You just press test up for the cost.
Is that the expectation would be the ratio.
You don't believe it? Know that. You'd have to know how many innocent people
that is
you've
on the
killed
basis
as well.
of the false Hamas figures. So the reality is that the expectation would be the ratio.
You don't believe it? So what is the number?
The reality is that the expectation would be the numbers are even less than that. That in any event is
Right,
unprecedented.
exactly. See, she's saying it's even less than 1 to 1 or 1.5 to 1.
In the history of urban armed conflict. So it puts the lie to all of these accusations that we have been hearing. And the reason, let me finish this sentence, if you will. The reason that it is so terrible, that it is so dangerous that these lies are being spread about Israel, that even you and other respected international journalists have begun to propagate them, is that it is having a direct impact. No, that you have been taken in by them,
really?
Is because it is having a direct impact on the safety of Jews around the world. We've seen the impact of 14,000 babies in 48 hours when 2 Israeli staffers were murdered, executed on the streets of DC. Only yesterday, we saw a fire.
What was the link? What was the link there? Are you saying that the person?
2 days after
are you saying the person that perpetrated that appalling murder was actually even aware of the story you're talking about? You're drawing a direct link.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is like, you have daily atrocities being committed in Gaza. The same people defending these atrocities are upset how people are talking about the atrocities. They're saying, oh no, but you're being too harsh in how you describe this very obvious atrocity. And when you do so, that might get people to not like Jews. No. A much greater radicalizing factor than how we talk about the atrocities are the atrocities themselves. It's daily videos of dismembered children we're seeing out of Gaza. It's parents holding the limbs of their children. This is radicalizing people, not how people are talking about it. Can and does rhetoric contribute to radicalization? Sure, but you're focusing on the wrong thing. You're defending a very obvious atrocity. And then when people rightfully are speaking about it, you're criticizing how they're speaking about it. And it does go without saying that there's no justification for attacking people and killing them in the name of freeing Palestine. Not only is it not defensible ethically, but it's counterproductive. And it also makes the case for Zionism, because if Jews don't feel safe, well, that's the greatest argument for Zionism, that we need a country to be safe. So there's many reasons why we should not be attacking civilians. But to blame it on rhetoric and not on Israel's actions, it's just you refuse to reflect on the real cause because it's inconvenient for you.
The Chicagoan that committed that murder shouted "Free Palestine," and this is for Gaza.
You mentioned something about 48,000
2 days after that full story went around the world.
It was a full story because the idiot that came out with it should have known better. I didn't promote that in any way at all, other than to say.
But you are promoting false allegations of starvation and targeting civilians.
No, I'm promoting the fact that Israel's government launched a 3-month blockade, which has led
without
to
context
people
of 25,000 tons of trucks of aid having been provided before that.
Dave,
facts without context are misleading.
All right, Dave, we're a bunch of deluded clowns who are.
Facts without context are misleading, sure. I mean, but she's not even giving real facts. Like, cool, let's start with actually getting the facts right, and then let's talk context. She doesn't even have the facts right. I'm not even sure she's made a correct statement this whole time. Maybe something trivial. Fahed, I see, I'm going to read this comment. I said we'll do comments at the end, but because I think, I want to give this proper attention. But Fahed, a friend from Gaza, says, "Hi, Dar, lately my aunt was killed in a drone strike on her tent. She and her 2 daughters and 2 grandchildren were killed in that attack, in addition to her daughter's husband." I'm so sorry, brother. I can't even imagine. Yeah, I'm sorry for your loss, man. And, thank you for sharing it. I think it is important to be able to continuously show to the world what is happening in Gaza. Now, if I had, and maybe I'll just address this after we do this review, but I want to pose the question to you. Many would say, whenever somebody's killed, they say, oh, there must have been militants there. There must have been some militant activity. Do you want to share your thoughts regarding that? I know we've spoken about it, but I know the viewers today would want to hear your thoughts on that. If there were combatants, clearly, regardless, it doesn't justify it. But I know this is, many in the pro-Israel camp, this is generally where their mind goes to when they hear a whole family being wiped off the face of the earth. And again, I'm sorry, brother.
Being misled. Israel's government is telling the whole truth here. Everyone else is lying or being taken in by lies.
Yeah, it's just like, look,
we're putting Jews in danger by promoting these lies. You're a Jewish guy.
Yes, I am. And maybe I'll respond to that. Well, first of all, I'll just say that even the idea, like, as you hear these arguments, Piers, where they'll say like, well, we know these numbers that the Gaza Health Ministry puts out are lies because we know Hamas lies. And look, the proof of that is that they revised their numbers down at one point. But doesn't that just kind of lead to the question, Piers, then, like, why would they revise their numbers down?
Why would they?
Finally, somebody made that argument. Cool.
Why, yeah, right. Why wouldn't they just stick with the original numbers that they had?
In fact, the buzzword of the debate.
It's what always happens with the pro-Israel people is like they use what is a point on my side as a point on their side.
And by the way,
like,
I wouldn't trust Hamas as far as I could bloody throw them, right? They're a bunch of despicable death cult murderers, right? Just to be crystal clear. I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them. And yet historically, their figures through this health authority in this conflict going back decades have turned out to be reasonably accurate. I know that because Israel has accepted them over the years.
And Piers, as you know, because I've been coming on your show for a long time now, I've always said the same thing too. I also don't really trust the Gaza Health Ministry. I'm just making the point that them revising the numbers down would be a point of evidence that they're being honest, not a point of evidence that you can't trust them. But look, I will just say this, okay? And Piers, again, because I've been coming on your show, I've done a lot of these debates that, over the last year and a half or so. I would never, like, if you remember, there was this example of the guy in Florida who is being charged with attempted murder right now because he shot 2 people who he thought were Palestinians. Turned out they weren't. He was wrong. But I would never use that as an example in one of these debates and say, aha, pro-Israel person, you're responsible for that. Right. I'm a free market, libertarian, free market capitalist guy. There was a Bernie Sanders fan who shot up a congressional baseball game several years back. I would never use that in an argument and say, you're responsible for that, because it's the cheapest, lamest form of argument. You are not responsible if you're telling the truth as you see it, for some crazy person committing a horrific act of violence. By the way, we're talking about, ongoing innocent people being killed for over 20 months at this point now. So like, that's what the whole conversation is about. But the idea that any of us are responsible. Look, here's the bottom line, Piers. I understand Natasha wants to sit here and say, the reason you've changed your mind is because you've fallen for the propaganda. You've fallen for the lies. The reason why everyone is so outraged is because they're falling for these propaganda. The truth is that the reason why Piers and so many people around the world are turning on what the Israeli government is doing is because it's just so freaking horrible. Because we're seeing images every day of children suffering through an ungodly fate. We all sit there and think, my God, if those were our kids. It's a pure reaction to witnessing evil. And you guys sit here and spin the fact that this is all propaganda or it's all lies. I mean, look, I admire you being a lawyer and trying to defend your client. I guess that's what lawyers got to do no matter how guilty your client is. Piers, if I'm ever charged with murder, get this lady to represent me. So that's who I want on my team. But the bottom line is that 2 former Israeli prime ministers are not falling for propaganda.
And you know what, Dave? You know what? One of them,
they can't deny it.
Right, and one of them.
You notice Natasha's facial expression. She's struggling hard right now.
Ehud Omar, he said to me that he thinks Netanyahu, A, should have resigned by now, but B, will be in The Hague one day being held accountable for these war crimes. And I mean, I guess my question for you, Natasha, you're a lawyer. Would you be prepared to defend him if Netanyahu appeared at The Hague?
We're talking about the International Criminal Court.
Would you be prepared to defend him?
No, well, let me be clear about the context, because this is important. We're talking about the International Criminal Court, which has no jurisdiction in this matter because Israel is not a party to the ICC and Palestine is not a state. It clearly made significant errors on prior determinations of jurisdiction on the basis of an accession document, supposedly by the Palestinian Authority, which was never circulated. That was one of the primary planks of its decision in 2021, which has fallen away. It is proceeded on this basis in contravention of its own rules, that of complementarity, and on an entirely false basis. So my organisation, UK Lawyers for Israel, has put out a review of Karim Khan's application for warrants, which demonstrated that every phrase of every sentence of that document was false. In that context, we're not seeing an international criminal court anymore. We're seeing a political body which is seeking to rehabilitate itself by going after the leaders of the world's Jewish state because of its abysmal
reputation. Is there anyone who criticises the Israeli government that you?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, notice what she did there. She tried to say on a technicality they don't have jurisdiction because Palestine's not a sovereign state, so therefore they're not protected by the ICC. This is literally trying to win on a technicality rather than understanding what's right, what's wrong. It's ridiculous. Wait, she made another point. What was her second point? Damn, I forgot what she said. Hold on.
By going after the, we're not seeing an international criminal court anymore. We're seeing a political.
Oh yeah. Okay. I mean, the ICC, they issued arrest warrants for Hamas leadership as well, not just Israeli leadership. And when you look at their arrest warrants, they've issued more arrest warrants for Muslims and Africans than they have of people of any other religion or ethnic background. So if you want to make the case they're anti-Semitic, first you need to make the case that they're racist and Islamophobic. They don't have some track record of being disproportionately unfair towards Jews. The war crimes are blatant. I mean, we see them in front of our eyes. We have whistleblower reports. We have reports from people on the ground. We have photo and video evidence. It's not. If the International Criminal Court can't rule on this, then they're worthless. If what Israel's doing in Gaza is okay and legal according to international law, well, then the law needs to be revised. That's why the legal argument is less important than the moral argument, because what's legal isn't always moral. So the law should reflect morality, right? So again, she's trying to defend it on a technicality and attribute malice to the ICC when there's, again, based on what? Based on what? Even Putin has an arrest warrant. Like, what's she talking about?
Which is seeking to rehabilitate itself by going after the leaders of the world's Jewish state because of its abysmal
Is there anyone who
reputation.
criticises the Israeli government that you don't think is doing so for political reasons or because they're being deluded by
Oh my
lies?
goodness, yes.
In other words, is anybody actually acting, do you think, with any integrity
Well,
when
within
they
Israel.
criticise the Israeli government?
Within
Because you
Israel.
make it sound like everyone's either stupid, deluded, or politically motivated.
Within Israel, there is the most vibrant political debate and criticism that you will see anywhere. What I'm calling out are the lies and the falsehoods and the blood libels that have been propagated. And those
I was told
that
by
are
the ambassador to
interested-
UK it was a blood libel for me to suggest that Israel had killed children. in this
No,
war.
I don't believe that was the case.
There
It has
was.
to do with targeting children.
No, no.
But there is a difference.
Right.
Because we are hearing that Israel is targeting children, and that couldn't be further from
Well,
the
last
fact.
week, 9 out of 10 children in one home
Well,
where 2 doctors
do you know-
reside were killed in an airstrike.
Well,
What was
isn't
that?
it remarkable?
Well, what was that?
That has been based only on the basis of hearsay.
You don't
and
believe that
secondhand
story?
information. I want these
Wait,
stories.
wait a minute. You don't believe
Yes.
that those children were killed?
I have seen conflicting accounts, and I want that story to be properly investigated
Wow.
before the international media
Wow.
runs with it. I have
You
a
think
question.
those 2 parents, one of whom I think operated on one of the children,
I have a
do
question.
you think that those 2 doctors, the parents, they just made it up?
Why are
That
those
9 of their
children
10
banned?
children had been blown to pieces
Yes.
by an Israeli airstrike?
If this is true,
You don't believe it?
well, why on earth was artificially generated imagery used?
Yeah, I mean, this is atrocity denialism. It's just again, there's no real contention over if they were killed. It's true that an AI generated image was circulating, but that's not proof that it didn't happen. Because AI generated images are so easy to create today, people are often going to create them to essentially a reenactment, right? So you don't have a video of her next to all 9 of her children wrapped up. That's a very sensationalist image. So someone created it using AI to show the world a reenactment of what happened, essentially. That's not proof that it didn't happen. And again, look at her level of skepticism that she has for any claim that a Palestinian makes. If a Palestinian makes a claim, not only Hamas, right? This isn't a Hamas claim. This is the woman herself is saying she lost her children. If Palestinians say something, we should assume that it's false. The same way we assume Hamas says something is false. If an Israeli says something or the Israeli government says something, we should assume that's true. That's their call it an epistemological framework. Anyways,
used to promote this story when it first
I've got to say,
We've seen
Natasha,
time
I think
and
what
time
you've
again.
just said about that
Piers
family
Morgan, we've seen
is despicable.
We've seen time
I'm
and
sorry,
time again.
it's
Yeah, is that
despicable.
blood libel?
truly
Somebody, you talk
despicable.
about blood libel, like Dave said, you talk about blood libel, you talk about lies,
All I said
you talk about promoting
was that there were
propaganda,
conflicting
and here you sit
accounts.
here as a lawyer and you say that you do not believe those 9 children were
I
killed.
didn't say that. You're putting
You
words
did.
in my mouth.
Do you believe it or
I
not?
said that there were conflicting
Do you believe
accounts
it?
and it needs to be
Do you
investigated.
believe it?
I thought you would be
The parents said 9 of their 10
once-
children were killed.
They
Do you believe them or not?
haven't- they
Or did those
haven't
2
said that directly.
doctors make it up?
They haven't said that directly as far as I have seen. I have seen second-hand accounts and hearsay. But it's important to ask, why are these civilians still there? Why is it that
Actually, no, it's important to us whether you believe that family
No.
have lost 9 of their 10 children.
I want
Actually.
to know why the
You
international
don't, do you?
community...
You don't. And this goes to the point that I would say about Israel
Why
generally
is
now, in this war now.
Palestinian
Israel says they don't believe anything.
Coming out of
Everything,
Hamas,
every
indeed.
story that comes out about the deaths of civilians in Gaza,
Because there is a track
someone will
record
pop
of
up
lies.
representing the Israeli government saying, it's propaganda, it's not true, I've heard it's not right, I've heard it didn't happen. And the reason you can get away with it, frankly, is because you won't allow, the Israeli government won't allow, I'm going to keep putting you in the government, but you defend them. The Israeli government refuses to allow international journalists to get in there and do their job and verify whether any of these things are actually
So I
happening.
have been
When you
there.
say they didn't happen.
I can help you with why. I've been there in September and seen a great deal of the Hamas terror infrastructure with my own eyes, including the fact that when we were in Rafah, every second building was being
Did you
used
see any dead
by
children?
Hamas. No, and this is the
Wow.
important factor.
Why do you think that?
Our movement...
Is that because there aren't any,
No,
or because you were being given a sanitized little tour,
No, we were
which
being-
didn't involve seeing the bodies of dead children?
we were very restricted because of the nature of the battlefield in
What
in
right does the
Gaza.
IDF have to restrict journalists doing their job? In every
But
other
on the
war I've
basis-
ever been involved in, including sending my Daily Mirror journalists to cover the Iraq war in Baghdad, where they rang me at midnight to ask if they should leave or stay in a hotel, the Baghdad Hilton, I think it was called, before shock and awe arrived. So huge responsibility on my shoulders then about the lives of my journalists, but they were prepared to risk them to report the truth to the wider world. Israel has decided no journalists from outside can go in
For 3 reasons.
and make that assessment themselves.
Yes.
What right does Israel have to do that?
For 3 reasons. Will you allow me to finish?
Well, there are no reasons.
well, you've
That's
just
none of
asked-
your business
you
whether the
just-
journalists view
You
their
don't
safety
really
as being
have-
at risk.
I'm sorry.
that's annoying. She said he asked her what's the reason. She says there's 3, and now he's not letting her explain. Like, come on, Piers, you got to let her explain herself.
You haven't heard the reasons yet. The first, of course, is the safety of the journalist, and I appreciate you don't accept that. The
I
second,
think it's a load of nonsense.
the second is the
The
safety.
idea you're doing with like some quaint concern for the safety of journalists is bullshit.
That was reason number one.
Utter
Reason
bullshit.
number two is the is the ability of IDF soldiers to be able to conduct this war against Hamas without
without the journalists getting in the way.
No, without.
And actually, by the way, they killed more journalists in Palestinian journalists than in any war
Hamas
in
members
modern
wearing
history.
press vests are not journalists. And reason number 3.
So none of them are journalists.
And reason number 3.
So just to be clear, none of the Palestinian journalists who've been killed are actually journalists.
I said Hamas members.
Are they all Hamas members?
Those that are.
Every single dead Palestinian journalist is a member of Hamas. Is that your position?
Listen, I appreciate Piers.
That is also bullshit.
But misrepresenting
every So that's 2 out of 2. What's the third reason?
Our mutual friend Douglas Murray was embedded with the IDF in Lebanon.
You said the words yourself. I love Douglas, but he was embedded with the IDF.
Right.
He's unbelievably pro-Israel. So of course he was going to write what he witnessed while embedded with the IDF.
No, let me finish what his experiences there were. The difference is
you have to tell me.
There is something I think that you won't have heard. The IDF are able to allow journalists into Lebanon. He wasn't the only one. There were many other international journalists.
There have been a tiny...
Those other international journalists with him were very clear.
There have been a tiny handful of journalists led in by the IDF in tightly controlled environments to witness what the IDF were prepared to let them see.
And you know what those
actually, what it needs this war, to stop the bullshit, which is out of control, by the way, this last 3 minutes, is to let international journalists go in and do their jobs. And they will worry with their networks or organizations about their safety, but they should be allowed to do their jobs. And there's only one reason why the Israeli government doesn't want international journalists crawling all over Gaza. It's because they do not want them reporting what they will find. Which, by the way, will include the bodies of thousands of children who you, on the Israeli side, are not counting, as you count the terrorists you kill, but who journalists would.
Reason number 3 is that those journalists that were in Lebanon said that they had to be very careful about what they reported because of what Hezbollah would do to their colleagues in Beirut. The fact that international journalists have sunk to this level, that they would allow their reportage to be controlled by terrorist organizations, Iranian proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah included, is despicable. That is the real issue here that has driven
Actually, it's not. The real issue is...
Yeah, as if that's really what Israel's as if their consideration is, you know what, the journalists want to get let in, but we really need to care about their well-being, so we can't do it. That's just bullshit. I would say the 2 most plausible explanations are, and it's likely a combination of these 2 and perhaps other factors, but one is that they just don't want journalists to be able to report on obvious war crimes. The other is, if there's many journalists in Gaza, they definitely, when they kill a Palestinian journalist, they'll just say it's Hamas. We saw Natasha do that. No problem. But every time an international journalist is killed, horrible for PR. So it creates a situation that doesn't let the Israeli Air Force as much freedom to strike because there's a much greater presence of people you don't want to kill. Right now, if it's almost entirely Palestinians in Gaza, there's much less consideration because if you kill civilians, whatever, they're Palestinian civilians, it's just another number. But if you kill a journalist, an international journalist, that's actual news. I think having all those journalists in Gaza gives them a little bit less freedom to strike the way they're striking. This idea that it's for their own well-being, I mean, Israel will literally drop a bomb on a home of a hostage taker, even if there's intel that hostages might be present. We'll kill our own hostages if we want to get some militants. This idea that we care so much about the well-being of international journalists is just, there's no reason to believe that to be the case. So Jonathan Buckenmeyer saying she didn't deny, though, he's strawmanning. You're saying she didn't deny the children being killed. It's a form of denying. I mean, it's not, at this point, there's no reason to contest that to be the case. I mean, there's no reason to believe it's not true. She's relying on, again, oh, there was AI, but that does not make the case that it's fake. There's many reasons. One very logical reason why AI is being used. It shouldn't be used, but we could see why it is. For her to say it's contested, no, it's not contested. Those kids are dead. They were killed in an airstrike. And again, she would never approach an Israeli claim like this. If somebody were to mention sexual violence on October 7th, she wouldn't say, well, there's conflicting reports. She'd never do that. Because if a report conflicts with the Israel narrative, then that report doesn't matter. If there's a report that conflicts with Hamas, that is essential, right? Again, this is how propagandists view things, generally speaking.
This is terrorist organizations' propaganda.
Actually, it's not. Let me bring David.
And the fact that you will not allow me to answer a single question.
You know what? You made all your points, and they all, I'm afraid,
I certainly haven't made all my points.
So let me bring in Dave. Dave, look, I don't like to keep saying the word bullshit, but when you hear a lot of bullshit, you have to call it for what it is, bullshit. And the truth is, particularly on the journalist front, there is a very simple way that all this fog of war confusion could be resolved, and they need to let the journalists in. And there's a very simple reason why they're not. They don't want the journalists to report to the world what is actually going on. Otherwise, they'd let them in.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I understand, Natasha, that you're upset that Piers isn't letting you finish your thought, but the idea that the number one reason you gave is that what Israel just values the sanctity of life so much that they're so worried about these journalists, it's just so ridiculous.
Actually,
It doesn't pass the
offensive,
basic smell
honestly,
test. Yes, it's offensive to think that level, you talk about propaganda being spread. That is just pure propaganda. It is obvious. It is obviously the reason Israel
who's going to be
doesn't
blamed? Sorry, Natasha just said, who will be blamed for the journalist deaths? A recognition that yet more journalists would be killed, because I think it's well over 100 Palestinians who you think are all Hamas members. But you know what? It's not your job to worry about the safety of international journalists. They've all been to many, many war zones.
That's
whether it's Clarissa Ward at CNN,
yes.
Jeremy Nolan at BBC. I know a lot of these people myself. You let the journalists do their job, and you do yours,
by the way,
and the IDF can do theirs.
They don't seem to have this concern about being blamed for slaughtering the children of Gaza. You know,
they don't admit they're killing any.
Stop that. Right. As every time you hear, it's either, oh, this is propaganda, this is Hamas propaganda, those kids weren't intentionally killed, all this stuff. But look, like we said at the beginning, this is just, it doesn't meet the basic smell test, the basic human test. If you're telling me, as you said, Natasha, that Hamas has locked up all of the aid that's gotten in there, so who are you targeting when you don't let further aid in? It's the civilian population who's not getting it. Now you can sit here and say, Israel isn't targeting them, meaning I blow up a building that I know has little children in it, but I'm claiming I'm targeting the bad guy. But you know that in effect, your action is going to, in effect, destroy the civilian population. I'm sorry, this is a distinction without a difference. And I don't care about your appeal to international law. Look, I'm Lysander Spooner on this issue of international law. I think either international law allows what Israel is doing to Gaza, or it's been powerless to stop it. So either way, it has not been effective enough. By the way, it does seem like it's the latter, not the former, seeing as how there is, you know.
Yeah, that's true. International law, it's more so an issue of enforcement than interpreting what Israel's doing incorrectly.
Criminal warrants out for Netanyahu for committing war crimes. But regardless of that, the bottom line here is that Israel is doing this to the civilian population of Gaza, and nobody who's being honest doesn't believe that the only reason Israel won't let journalists in there is because they don't want the world to see what they're doing to these people. Period. That's the reason, and everybody, including you, knows it. The problem here is that you're not allowed to tell the truth. You're Israel's lawyer, and you got to defend them no matter what. Natasha, does Israel have nuclear weapons?
Sorry, I'm an independent
Does Israel have
member
nuclear
of the
weapons?
English bar.
Yes or no?
That's a good
I'm
question.
not instructed.
Yes or no?
I'm
Yes
not
or no,
instructed.
Natasha? Do they
Does Israel have
nuclear
nuclear weapons, Natasha?
Why do you think I would know any better than you, Piers?
That's actually clever of Dave to take something like unrelated that would be hard for someone like Natasha to admit, even though there's pretty much, I mean, unless all Israelis are wrong on this, but like if you ask the average Israeli, there's no contention. We have nuclear weapons, right? We don't contest that. But it's a clever move Dave did there.
You do know. You do know. You are not telling the truth, and so you won't say it. Here, Piers, let me just say, it's disqualifying to this conversation. You're playing a different game than me and Piers are. We are having a conversation about what's actually going on. You're a lawyer who's not allowed to incriminate your client, which is Israel, because you know the answer the same way Piers knows it, the same way I know it. Do they have nukes?
Oh man, Dave's slaying her, right? But so this is Pierce's mistake. He should have let more of this happen. Again, don't give people the opportunity to say it was unfair and they teamed up on her, because that is what's happening. This is not a fair debate. They did something similar with John Spencer. So on one hand, it's cool to see propagandists destroyed like this, but do it on a fair playing field. The destruction of them will carry just so much more weight if you do it that way.
To be perfectly clear, I am not in the employ of anyone associated.
What's the name of your organization?
UK Lawyers for Israel began as a voluntary association of lawyers looking for the proper
UK Lawyers for Israel. Okay.
application of law to Israel, Israelis, and combating anti-Semitism. It is truly remarkable. We are having a different conversation. This is a circus, and I'm actually seeking to address practical questions, including the disgusting situation that we are now left with, where the international community has said that Palestinian civilians must uniquely be kept in a war zone, may not be permitted to leave. That is what I am hearing being advocated for consistently, so that they can be continued to be used not just as human shields by Hamas, but as human sacrifices, dragging this conflict out. The tragedy of this misinformation and this propaganda is not just that Jews are being gunned down and burned in the street. It is also that Palestinian civilians are continuing to suffer as a result of this war, but also of Hamas suppression, repression, torture, and the stealing of aid, which has been well documented. The fact that people like the two of you will continue to put out this false information, to perpetuate this conflict, to perpetuate Palestinian suffering is truly disgusting. What have I said that's false?
I didn't think.
What if she said that's false? I mean, the better question is, what has she said that's true? So I had another point I wanted to make. Damn, I don't remember what it was. Okay. Oh, yeah. Evacuations, right. So she's actually right about something here. They're not allowing Gazans to evacuate. This is unprecedented. And I think the primary reason that the pro-Palestine camp, as well as the international community, is not so quick to allow for this to happen or to take in refugees from Gaza is because they view that as essentially a loss for the Palestinian liberation movement. So they're essentially valuing Palestine over Palestinians. If you ethnically cleanse Gaza, then Gaza becomes Israel. That's the assumption. So people don't want to allow Israel to take all of Gaza and make it Israel. So keeping civilians there makes it harder for them to do that. You could see this wouldn't be a publicly stated rationale. Sorry, hold on. You could see this as a publicly stated, it won't be a publicly stated rationale, but that's how I think many are looking at it. Palestine's more important than Palestinians. This is how also many of the leaders of the Palestinian liberation, this is how Hamas views it. They don't care about their civilians as much as they care about Palestine. They're willing to sacrifice however many it takes, right? So I think whether this is a healthy framing or not, I mean, I certainly question that. I generally think humans are more important than causes in most instances. I can hear an argument for both, but if you want to understand the Palestinian liberation movement and a lot of the motivations of many Palestinians and their supporters, you should look at it in these terms that often Palestine is more important than Palestinians. Now, if she's saying that there should be evacuations, there's only two borders with Gaza, Egypt and Israel. Why doesn't she advocate that Israel let them in? The international community is not cooperating. Okay, build a refugee camp for them within Israel. Why is she not suggesting that? We know why, but that would be, if she genuinely cared about evacuations, that should be a suggestion.
I think anyone could be more disingenuous than the UK ambassador. I got to say, Natasha, you've got right up there. You've crossed that little bar,
If you can indicate one aspect of what I have said that is incorrect, we will have this conversation. But so far, you are throwing out appallingly misconceived allegations.
Civilian to combatant ratio, she was wrong. Not being able to trust the Ministry of Health data, the extent to which Hamas is stealing aid, Israel's motivation for not letting aid in, Israel's motivation for not letting journalists in. I mean, come on, Natasha.
Which are baseless.
Do you know what? Israel, you know what?
Notice she couldn't answer the question.
Jonathan Conricus on, who's a former IDF guy, obviously, and even he was able to admit a lot of what Israel is now doing is wrong, and it just shouldn't be happening the way that it's happening. When you blindly, I mean, I think that Hamas are blindly, ideologically to one side of this. They're a bunch of genocidal maniacs. I think people like Smodrich are genocidal maniacs, and I think anyone on the pro-Israeli side, particularly a lawyer, who can listen to what Smodrich said last week and not understand that he is actually promoting war crimes out of his very mouth.
We haven't discussed Smodrich, and I'm not particularly interested in what he has to say because it's
he's the finance minister of the Israeli government. He's one of the three most powerful people in the country.
He clearly doesn't have an input to the war cabinet's policy.
Whoa, you see, again, that's just bullshit. He doesn't have input. I mean, the threat of him leaving government certainly motivates Netanyahu's decisions. That's just complete bullshit. Netanyahu has to maintain a coalition. Smotrich is part of that coalition. He's threatened to leave if XYZ. So that's just, to say he doesn't have input is just patently false. It's been reported time and time again. He's in there for the security meetings. He gives input. There's instances where he's been fighting with the generals. That's just, again, she asked, what did I say that's wrong? Here's just yet another thing she said that was wrong.
Or how this campaign has been run.
Even you don't believe that as you say it.
Well, I wouldn't be saying it if I didn't believe it.
You don't think that Smodrich has much influence over the Israeli government?
Not on the conduct.
Anything about the Israeli government?
Not on the conduct of this war.
Goebbels didn't have any control over policy. Therefore, it doesn't matter what he said.
I didn't interrupt Mr. Smith. The fact of the matter is that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Everything that the Israeli army, the Air Force, and the Military Advocate General Corps, which is actually unique in the manner in which it approves strikes and the military tactics that the IDF launched. In fact, when I was on the ground in Gaza, including with a very senior military official from the UK, Sir John McCall, all of the group remarked that the procedures that Israel had put in place were unprecedented, that it wasn't just adhering to international humanitarian law, the law of armed conflict, but in every respect was going far above the requirements, including in taking precautions to prevent civilian casualties.
How have they been so careful? Have they managed to destroy 70% of Gaza and killed, I think it's 50 to 60,000 people?
Well, those again are Hamas figures, which are not accurate.
What's the figure?
Well, you heard, I think, from the ambassador, 30,000.
How many people have you killed?
30,000. there you go with you again. I think there's been some misbriefing in this.
Well, you seem to be speaking on behalf of the government.
No, I'm speaking on behalf of the facts and the proper application of law, which I appreciate neither of you seem to be particularly interested in. But I will maintain my interest, in particular, the fact that these casualty figures by Hamas do not take account of how these people are said to have died. We know Hamas are shooting their own civilians. That false report of Palestinian civilians at aid centers being targeted by people said to but I will maintain my interest, in particular, the fact that these casualty figures by Hamas do not take account of how these people are said to have died. We know Hamas are shooting their own civilians.
Wait, we do know. I mean, these are violent deaths. We know indirect deaths aren't being added, as well as natural deaths, at least not to in any meaningful way, because natural and indirect deaths happen to very old and very young. We've seen no unusual spikes in deaths of those ages. We also get reports. We have names of people who we know Hamas has killed. One actually did appear on the list, but we have names of people Hamas has killed. Most are not on this list. In fact, all but one, based on the research I've done, are not on this list. And we have people who have died from indirect deaths that we know aren't being added to this list. So again, that's just a baseless remark. And again, how did one person who was killed by Hamas get added to the list? I think that's pretty easy to understand. Hospital capacity is the healthcare system has collapsed. The MOH is doing their best to try to produce this list every few months. If somebody comes in from a gunshot wound, there's a good chance they're going to just assume this was IDF and add it to the list. So yeah, is it possible that some amount of those killed have been killed by Hamas? Sure. But I mean, this is negligible, because had Hamas been killing thousands of their own, we would see evidence of it. We're not seeing evidence of mass killing of Hamas of their own civilians. We're just not. So it's a pretty big claim with no basis besides her just wanting it to be true.
Civilians. That false report of Palestinian civilians at aid centers being targeted by Israel, that was in fact Hamas shooting them.
You don't know that.
We have the drone
You don't know that.
And we have.
You actually don't know who killed them.
We have consistent.
No, yeah, again, there's no reason to believe that this was Hamas. That's not what's currently being reported. That's not what the evidence points to. Not at all.
The investigation is still going on, but of course it's an Israeli investigation, which will doubtless exonerate the Israeli forces.
We also know that Palestinian civilians are killed by indiscriminate missiles. Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas rockets, when they fall short in the Gaza Strip, they don't fall with a proportionality analysis. They don't fall precisely in the way that Israeli strikes are conducted, with warnings.
If you're doing everything so magnificently by the book, why is it that so many allies of Israel are now queuing up, and former prime ministers of Israel are queuing up to condemn it? Are they all utterly deluded?
No, there are two particular reasons for this. The first is what we have seen with the manufacturing of this disinformation that comes out of Gaza from Hamas, that is promoted by NGOs formerly respected, like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, that is then in turn reported by UN special rapporteurs, that finds its way into Security Council resolutions or General Assembly resolutions, that then in turn makes it up to institutions like the ICC and the ICJ. And then once that circle of disinformation is complete, these matters are often re-reported by the NGOs that started this disinformation cycle in the first place. That's reason number one. Reason number two is because of the mode.
Right. So again, she's right. That's why countries are turning on Israel, but she's wrong that it's misinformation, right? Countries are getting these reports. They're seeing the reality on the ground. They're responding to such. That doesn't mean there's never misinformation, right? The 14,000 dead babies within 48 hours, there wasn't any basis to that claim. It was a misreport. 73% being women and children also. So it's not like there's no misinformation, but even just taking the truth for what it is, there's no shortage of atrocities being committed, and rightfully governments are turning on Israel for this. It doesn't require fabrication and propaganda. What's propaganda is Natasha's attempted defense. Now, in terms of like all these rockets that fall and kill people, that's just another claim that we're meant to accept as true, even though there's no basis for it. There are misfired rockets, and I'm sure they've killed people, but again, negligible. One way to look at this is during the Israel's 2021 operation in Gaza. I don't have the number. I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but it's something along the lines of 12 Gazans were killed from misfired rockets. This is based on an Israeli report. And again, Israel has an incentive to inflate this, but that was after like 5,000 rockets were shot, 12 Gazan civilians were killed. Do the math. You've had 3 times as many rockets shot this time around, 12 times 3, 24. Let's say we want to be very charitable and 20x that. Okay, 500 people. Okay, so out of 50,000, 1%. That's if you 20x estimates from 2021. It's just, there's nothing there. It's just, again, one of these claims that has no basis.
In which the international media have conducted their reporting of this conflict. We have the Al-Ali hospital as a prime example on the 17th of October, 2023. Immediately it was reported that this was an Israeli airstrike. That was false, Piers. Just like the reports of Israel
Yeah, so again, that was never proven to be false. That was contested by Israel and agreed upon by US and UK intelligence agencies, but that was not determined to be false. In fact, and maybe I'll do a more thorough analysis on this at some point, but if you look at the video of the rocket strike, or the airstrike or rocket strike on Al-Ali Hospital, it resembles Israeli airstrikes, seemingly artillery. This was never proven to be false. Israel said it was false, and they confirmed it with their allies in the West, which is Western intelligence, which again, same Western intelligence that said Saddam had WMDs, etc. Like, this isn't a legitimate way to prove your claim is true. But yeah, that wasn't proven to be false.
Targeting Palestinian civilians trying to get aid were false. I urge you to use a little bit of logic here to assess what on earth Israel's objective could be, targeting civilians or hitting hospitals like this willy-nilly, which it does not do without good reason, because Hamas has used them as command and control centers, and when it provides warnings to enable civilians to evacuate. Why on earth would Israel be targeting Palestinian civilians when it has been seeking from the get-go to evacuate them, to provide humanitarian corridors, which it has defended, even though Hamas has fired onto these civilians as they seek to flee areas where Hamas has embedded its terror infrastructure in these civilian areas, in mosques, schools, hospitals, and every second house when I was in Rafah that we saw. That is the truly.
How many houses did you see?
That is the truly.
How many houses did you see?
Well, many of them were destroyed,
Well, how many did you see?
unfortunately.
You said every second house. You saw 10 houses.
No, tens, plural.
10. Well, how many? How many?
But Hamas
you said
is
every
there.
second house.
Yes.
So how many did you see?
No, every second house.
How many?
Yeah, I mean, also this whole every second house, Douglas Murray says the same thing. You have countless GoPros in Gaza on IDF troops. Any pattern they claim, such a prevalent use of civilian infrastructure, we would see this with video and photo evidence. Israel has every incentive and reason to show this to the world. The usage of civilian infrastructure is primarily exits of tunnels, right? So there's a tunnel city under Gaza. They need to come out from someplace. Some of those are civilian buildings. But this whole thing that every second house is being used, that's never been demonstrated. What is much more likely is that once an area is evacuated, Hamas will then take over this civilian infrastructure and use that. Yes, once it's been evacuated. But the idea that there's like a whole family eating dinner and then Hamas is shooting a rocket from that building, this is what they want you to believe is happening. But again, this has not been demonstrated. Again, show me some video, show me video evidence of this. There's a lot of GoPros, there's drone footage. Let's see it. You make a claim, let's see it. Oh, and she says, I want you to be rational, use your mind. Okay. Currently, Israel's stated goal is the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Netanyahu said they're not going to stop until Trump's plan has been established. If your goal is to ethnically cleanse a population, the easiest way to do that is for them to volunteer to leave. The best way to get them to volunteer to leave is to make their current life unbearable, to make Gaza unlivable. So you could see now that Israel's been clear about their plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza, you could actually see a clear motivation to harm civilians, whether it's destroying their homes or vital civilian infrastructure or even direct attacks on them. I don't think, because of how the chain of command works, I don't think there's instances where the Israeli Air Force is saying, we know that's only civilians and we're going to kill them. I don't think that's how it's happening. It's more so, I think we see some suspicious activity, or we have intel that there might be a militant there and we might kill a whole family along the way. Okay, let's do it. The callous indifference for civilian well-being is likely a better explanation than they're trying to kill as many civilians as possible. So I think, one, it's a callous indifference. Two, it is an attempt to make Gaza unlivable. We see this just by the sheer destruction of civilian infrastructure. Now, so why would Israel do evacuations and do this and that? I mean, if you concentrate people to a smaller area, it's easier to fight Hamas. It's also easier to ethnically cleanse people if they're concentrated in an area, but also so you have plausible deniability. Like, to commit these atrocities for the world to see, no. So you take precaution, you do evacuations, you make it seem, right? You can't get away with the same war crimes you could in the 20th century. Not with international law and human rights and the fact that everything's filmed. So you commit atrocities with plausible deniability. So Natasha, you said be rational. Okay, rational. Israel shared their stated goal, ethnic cleansing. the easiest way to achieve that is to make Gaza unlivable, essentially attacking civilians and their way of life. So there's a very clear rationale here. So why don't you use your be rational and try to think of it in those terms?
How many houses did you go into?
It doesn't matter.
It does matter.
Because
You've made a statement. You said every second house. How many did you go into?
the houses were
Give me a
no longer
number.
left there.
You know how many houses you went into?
Tens.
What, 10, 15, 20?
Piers, you're missing the point here.
No, I know the point.
Is that
You
Hamas,
made a claim.
Hamas
I'm simply asking you to give me a number. Numbers are not your strong point. I know that.
I beg your pardon?
But I imagine you remember how many houses you went into.
No, we saw destroyed houses in the Rafah area because Hamas has been using these houses as part of its terror infrastructure.
How do you know?
Because they make clear
You
their
said you went
tactic.
into them and you...
No, I
you
never,
said,
again, you're putting words in my mouth. If you would listen, I think things would be a lot clearer.
Right.
Hamas has
So
made
you
it
know
clear.
what was inside houses, even though you didn't go inside them and they were all obliterated.
You know I couldn't go inside them because they were booby-trapped by
You
Hamas.
didn't go
But what
inside
I
them
did
and they were all
see-
destroyed.
What I did
But you
see-
knew they were all full of Hamas stuff.
What I did see
How?
is drone footage that goes into
drone footage.
that went into these houses that
So
demonstrated.
you didn't go into the houses. You didn't see any Hamas stuff in there, but you saw
Yeah, it seems like she may have been caught in a lie here.
drone footage.
They demonstrated
Right, so you
how
got the
Hamas.
idea.
Well,
All
look,
right,
Hamas make it very clear.
you know
You
what?
won't
Sorry,
take
it's
my
just
word
too
for it.
flannel, isn't it?
You always take Hamas's word for it. So listen to what they
Yeah,
say.
you take your
Well,
word for it. Sounds like a little bullshit again.
Well,
Dave.
listen, Piers, as I've dealt with this argument with Douglas Murray and now here today, this is about as serious as Dennis Rodman claiming that Kim Jong-un showed him a supermarket full of food. You know, I mean, I don't know what to say here. And it would be equally ridiculous if I went on some Hamas-sponsored tour and then came back telling you that everything they say is correct. Here's the bottom line. I have a much more clear logical answer. The reason why two former Israeli prime ministers, including Omar, who is a right-winger, who was Sharon's guy, this is not as if this is some left-wing anti-war peacenik or something like that. The reason why two former Israeli prime ministers have come out and said that Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza is because Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza. The reason why Israel will not let journalists into Gaza is because Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza. And the reason why Israel is killing Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and the reason why they're building up more settlements in the West Bank is because, as Smotrich has said, as Katz, the defense minister, has said this week, and as Benjamin Netanyahu has said for years and years and years, their plan is greater Israel. They want Gaza and the West Bank. They call it Judea and Samaria. They believe that it's rightfully Israel's. Benjamin Netanyahu.
So let me just give some clarification here. Greater Israel has two different connotations. Actually, for those who have seen the debate on this channel between Rudy and Noam Chomsky, that was one area they got stuck on for way too long. How is Greater Israel defined? So there's two definitions. One is all the land between the river to the sea, West Bank, Gaza, and Israel proper. It is true that there is immense political motivation to have all the land whole. What many, though, claim Israel's intention is Greater Israel, which includes like parts of Egypt and Jordan and Syria, to really massive. Some people will show the map. There's no political will or real political movement to achieve that. Someone like Smotrich specifically, I imagine, would advocate for that, but that's not feasible. The Greater Israel, which is in question, and there are many both politicians and people that want the entire land to be Israel. That's a very real movement, one that many are working towards.
Who showed up to the United Nations a couple weeks before October 7th with a map where it was all Israel. That's the bottom line, is why they've been controlling these territories since 1967. See, the truth makes a lot more sense. And by the way, you know that Israel has nuclear weapons, but you won't say it on this program because you're not in the business of telling the truth about this conflict. You're in the business of defending Israel, which is fine. That's what you want to do. But all three of us know they have nuclear weapons. Maybe we should get into where does international law stand on the US and the UK being partners with a country who's not in the non-proliferation treaty, who has nuclear weapons. Maybe we could have a whole conversation on that next time, Piers.
I think you know what?
We all know
Will you
what the
allow
truth
me
is
to
here.
answer?
I've actually asked Netanyahu myself that very question, and he didn't answer. So yeah, I think it'd be a very interesting topic for debate. We've got to leave it there. Dave Smith, Natasha Hausdorff, thank you both very much. Ahmed Adaoug is a Palestinian.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, that wasn't conducted the best way. Like, Pierce should have definitely given her more time to speak, not do the interruptions. There's nothing threatening about her arguments that you wouldn't want to let her speak. Like, literally let her share the propaganda and then debunk it. Again, now this is just used as an excuse. People are saying Pierce is an anti-Semite, Natasha didn't get a fair chance, which is true. It would be better to just destroy her on the merit of her ideas. Let's see. Let's do Q&A. We will prioritize super chats, and then in 30 or so minutes, we'll take this over to Discord for a Discord after party. Now, so real quick, Ellie says the stated goal started in January. The accusations against Israel started before. How do you explain that? Yeah, many people suspected this to be the goal of Israel. People from very early on were saying, from even like weeks after October 7th, were saying Israel's goal is XYZ. At the time, you could have said this is unfounded to claim that their goal is to ethnically cleanse Gaza, but this was people's suspicion. And it seems that suspicion ultimately was not unfounded. So that explains why people were talking about it before. But even before that stated goal, I mean, just the destruction we saw in the weeks after October 7th, full neighborhoods leveled before any evacuations took place. It was very clear that there's massive destruction. Just by how many neighborhoods were flattened in the days following October 7th. And the 3 weeks after October 7th were by far the most bloodiest. I mean, just putting a number out there, more civilians were killed in the 3 weeks after October 7th than the number of Jews that have been killed by Hamas in the past, or that have been killed by Palestinians in the past 100 years. Just to show the difference in how much one side civilians are being killed relative to the Israeli side. In 3 weeks, more civilians than what they've killed in 100 years. Let's see, Q&A. SRG says Yoav Gallant was against ethnic cleansing. It's possible, but he's also gone now, you know. It's not uncommon for the Minister of Defense, the general, and the prime minister to have conflicting opinions on how things should be run. A report came out yesterday on some motivation Netanyahu had to remove Gallant. I don't remember what it was, but it wasn't this specifically. But yeah, I mean, SRG, you might be right. I didn't see the report whether Gallant was against or not. I just don't know if that makes all too much of a difference. Zhao says, how can she lie with a straight face? So that's something I wonder, like, is she intentionally lying? I don't even know, right? When you're so biased, you really think that you're being truthful and you're not. I think people like Andrew Fox and Eisenberg, who keep putting out these faulty analyses on the death toll, I think they're intentionally lying. And the reason I say that is because I've corrected their errors on many occasions, and they refuse to engage with it. They refuse to make these corrections. They keep repeating the same bullshit. So I think they're at least being dishonest. Does Natasha know that she's lying? I think she's like, I'm a lawyer. I'm here to defend Israel. And then you just have confirmation bias. Any piece of information you hear that's in favor of Israel, you take that as true. Any information you see that is against Israel, you're very skeptical of if it's true. Many people construct their world, their reality doing just this. It's very possible she's doing the same. Whoops, sorry. Sruli says, how does it feel to live in Israel part-time with all of this going on? Do a lot of Israelis speak out against the conflict? No, most Israelis, I mean, polling shows that the majority would like this to end with a hostage deal. But there's a lot of criticism of the Israeli government by Israelis. Natasha herself even said this, but there is no institution in Israel more revered than the IDF, to the point where if you challenge the IDF for their conduct, there's social consequences. So it's taboo to criticize the IDF. So there's not as much criticism as there is of government and stuff like that. When it comes to IDF conduct, there's not all too much introspection and critique there. That said, we are seeing a growing anti-genocide movement. Now, what does this mean? There's been a very strong anti-war movement. Their primary motivation is stop sending our soldiers to die. Let's get the hostages back. The anti-genocide movement, which you could call it a subset of the anti-war movement, they're saying it's not just about getting the hostages back. It's about stopping to kill the children. They're focusing on the Palestinian civilians. This is a growing movement. Are those same people calling it a genocide? I don't know. I think there's probably mixed, but I try to make the distinction between those who are protesting because they want to get the hostages back and those who are highlighting the toll to civilian life. So that is a growing movement. Ellie Eshet said, did you go through the casualty report by Gregory Rose? It depends when it was published. I've looked at almost all the casualty reports put out previously, but maybe you want to link it here. I'm happy to give it a peek. It's possible I looked at it, or at the very least at the argument being made there. Yeah, so drop a link, Ellie. Hussein goes, it's a 4K live stream genocide. I mean, this is what's interesting is like atrocity denial in the past, right? Like you still have, there's many Holocaust deniers. Turkey still denies the Armenian genocide. And when you think about that, you're like, okay, it's in the past. We didn't have all this. We didn't have media reporting the same way. We didn't have all this video evidence, so they could get away with it. It's fascinating that here, even in broad daylight, when you could see daily videos of dismembered children, there's a strong enough propaganda machine that's able to kind of obfuscate and frame it in a way that makes it seem like, oh no, this is just war. Wars are fought. This will be studied for decades, I imagine. Milo Sabari says she's got a point there in terms of international law. It seems West Bank belongs to Israel, therefore not occupation. Where's your interpretation coming from? Because the international courts, as well as a consensus amongst international lawyers, says that it's not Israel. And okay, well, you could say if it's Israel, well, then you need to acknowledge that it's an apartheid, because the majority of the population living in the West Bank and 50% of the population living between the river and the sea aren't citizens of Israel. So Milo, would you say that it's not an occupation, but it is an apartheid? Because it sounds like it can't be neither in this instance. It could potentially be both, but I don't see how it could be neither. And then Milo, you say, are you familiar with the term uti posititis juris, UPJ? Yeah, I mean, I only know of this because of Natasha. I looked in it. That's not a strong legal argument. It's not a strong legal argument at all. In fact, I've seen pro-Israel people challenge this. She's essentially taking like some obscure law and applying it retroactively, which is almost never done. I would encourage you to do more research into UPJ, look at how it's generally applied, and see that it's just, that to me is one data point that she's just not an honest actor, that she relies on UPJ as if that means something. It's not a good application. And again, Milo, I see you mentioned UPJ again, but she also explains it in relation to 48. How does she then apply that also to the West Bank and all the West Bank? And again, if the entire West Bank is Israel, how do you justify having 70+% of the West Bank population not having equal rights? So that's apartheid, right? Like I don't see how we could have this both ways. Do you think, this is an interesting question, do you think that the existence of Israel necessitates what's happening now, or is this just the extremists winning? I think that it is the Zionist attempt to return home, return to their ancestral homeland, and recreate a Jewish state on land that's inhabited by another population, and having that population accept it, is highly unrealistic. There's no reason to think that the Palestinian population would just be okay with the establishment of a Jewish state on land that they've been living on for many generations. So it seems like violence in that instance would always be inevitable. The question is, how do you then contain that violence and find a way to reconcile it? One of my major critiques of Israel is that they've continuously imposed conditions on Palestinians that are ripe for producing violence. Again, and people often say, oh, you're justifying violence. This isn't about a justification. It's understanding that certain conditions create violent people. It's not controversial to say that if you're sent to jail and you spend decades in jail, it's harder to return to society because of the conditions you were in. I mean, we have this very clear recognition that your conditions create your worldview, or at the very least have a significant impact on your worldview. So yeah, if you impose upon a people conditions that are likely to lead to violence, and then you use that violence as a justification to impose on them more of the same conditions, and say you'll continue to impose these conditions on them until they one day decide to love you, that's essentially Israel's approach to dealing with the Palestinians. And it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to think it's going to work. It's unethical to even attempt it, to maintain the status quo, thinking one day it'll just figure itself out. How could it have happened in a way that wouldn't have been resisted? I think if Zionists came with an attempt to build some kind of a shared homeland for Arabs and Jews, and started integrating themselves within Palestinian society, building relationships, building institutions together, I think that could have worked. Would it for sure have worked? No. And again, I'm saying this from my relative place of privilege. The early Zionists were deeply, deeply traumatized individuals. Did they have the understanding, the emotional intelligence to even know how to deal with like a conflict in such a way as to, oh, let's just go and be friendly and build ties? And I'm not trying to excuse it. This is what they should have attempted to do. But I recognize the early Zionists were radicals. You know, they were severely oppressed, severely traumatized people looking to build the homeland for themselves. The well-being or concern of the Palestinian people was just not a priority. Ellie is asking, if that's true, what explains the second Intifada? I'm not sure if what's true. What's that in reference to? Oh, and I see my cousin's here. What's up, cousin? He goes, hi, Ben Dod, which is hello, cousin. Love from Kdumim. Kdumim is a West Bank settlement. For those who don't know, most of my family members are actually, or a significant amount of them live all throughout the West Bank. So, David, it's good to see you here. I hope that my content is not too triggering. I know there's some controversial stuff said here, but I hope you're at the very least hearing it with an open mind. John Buckenheimer says, or violence creates certain conditions. Why do you put it that way around? Well, I would say it's both for sure. This is a cycle, right? Palestinian violence allows Israel to justify a security apparatus, which is imposing those same conditions that lead to the radicalization. But the reason I frame it that way is because the conflict started with our attempt to build a homeland. That in itself, the way we approached it is imposing on them conditions that would lead to violence. And the way we've tried to deal with it every moment since, maybe aside from a few rare occasions, has been to continue to impose these conditions on them. So it's always better to focus on institutions than on people. You can't say, oh, well, once the people stop being violent, then we're going to stop treating them this way. You don't change people just by having a request from them. That's like saying, well, maybe police brutality exists because people don't listen to the cops. Sure. But that doesn't mean police brutality is okay. You should change the institution, one where populations view cops as their protector and not their oppressor, right? So again, is the right thing to say, oh, well, cops don't need to stop abusing people. People need to stop disrespecting them. Generally, we should focus on transforming institutions and not telling people they need to change and respond. And I say the same exact thing about Israelis. Israelis you know, a recent poll shows the majority of Israelis support ethnically cleansing Palestinians, and it was nearly a majority of Jewish Israelis supported some form of genocide. And I've seen some like methodological flaws to that poll, so the numbers might be a little bit higher than what the Israeli population actually believes. But I mean, we've been radicalized. I don't think there's any way to de-radicalize us by saying that we need to change. That doesn't change us. We need to create institutions that de-radicalize our people. My cousin says, no, I love to hear you speaking. Some points to them out. Awesome. Great. Well, I'm looking forward to the next time we meet and we could talk more about this in person. I was worried I was going to get disowned by my family for a moment, that this is now, it's been spread even to them. Anyways, Critical Thinking Over Doctrine says, Zionists were European and acted like Europeans during that time. They weren't so unique in how they entered the land, although needs were different. Were you correct? They were very much seen, we were seen as colonizers. There was nothing about us that would get the local population to say, oh, look at those indigenous guys returning, our long lost brothers and sisters, welcome back. That's not how we returned. You know, we returned very much Europeanized. We were there for thousands of years. We spoke European languages. We wore European garbs. We don't look quite Middle Eastern. And it was very much supported by colonial powers. So there's no reason why like a Palestinian farmer in the early teens and 1920s are going to see Jews returning and be like, oh, you know what? They're not colonizers. They're indigenous people. There's no reason to think that would be their interpretation of our arrival. My channel says, wait, hold on. I want to stick on topic real quick. So sorry. Eliash said there's a direct question in this poll about genocide that the authors did not release for some reason. Interesting. Ellie, do you know what that question is? Because my critique of it, which I've seen people point out, is a lot of the questions about genocide and ethnic cleansing, they kind of framed it using religious terminology. So I think it was kind of framed in a way to show that there's a religious justification for such an action. And I think it increases the amount of people that would answer favorably to those questions when you frame it that way. But I'm interested in knowing what question you say was omitted. My channel says, does your family in the West Bank know that they live in occupied territories and not Israel? And do they know why moving civilian population to occupied territories is a war crime? No, so my family, as well as most Israelis, they recognize that this is the West Bank. They recognize that it is a different section of Israel, though. It's not this idea that we're now occupying land. It's very much, no, this is our land, historically speaking, and now by default. So we're going to live there. That's, I think, generally how it's looking at. And then international law, I think generally they will say, even though Israel's high courts have deemed the settlements illegal, right? So even Israeli courts have said that expansion of settlements is illegal. But the way most Israelis see it, it's either that they will rely on lawyers like Natasha to reach their conclusions, or it's just irrelevant. It's like, I don't care about international law. I care about my people, my own survival, my own rights. Fuck the international community. This is about us. So that's generally how it's looked at. Milo Sabri says, weren't Jews refugees more than colonizers when they arrived? I don't think it's one or the other. I think they were in fact both. I mean, even the exploration of the Americas were done by Protestants who were oppressed in Europe and wanted a better life. They had something akin to there was no refugee status back then, but they had similar motivations. Or you had instances, for example, the creation of Liberia was done by descendants of slaves that wanted to recreate a homeland in Africa, and that is, again, it's widely agreed upon to be a settler colonialist movement, despite them being indigenous to somewhere in Africa, right? But they still returned in a way that was deemed settler colonialism. So I think I think you could be both a refugee and a colonizer. The way I look at it is like I think Jews are, I think the debate over indigeneity is dumb because I don't think indigenous populations deserve more rights than other native populations, right? Should like a Cherokee American deserve more rights than another native born American? No, they deserve the same rights. So I don't think the argument of indigeneity matters all too much. But I have no issue. I think if we want to talk about indigeneity, we should recognize that it has a broad definition, broad enough that both Jews and Palestinians can be considered indigenous, and we could use this as a unifying factor between us and just acknowledge that these are two indigenous populations that should find a way to share this land. I think that's a healthy way to look at it. So I'm super okay with saying Zionism is an indigenous rights movement. I think we just need to acknowledge that it's an indigenous rights movement that used settler colonialism to achieve its goals. I think that's a fair and honest way to describe Zionism. Yaakov Mishka says, my family lived in Jerusalem already in the 17th century, probably way before. Yeah, so there are many Jewish families, mine as well. My family moved from Vilna, Lithuania to Tzfat in 1812, Tzfat to Safed, and then to Hebron in 1814, and my family's been here ever since. So there's certainly many families like that. These earlier Zionists were generally well integrated into the towns and cities and communities that they were living in. It wasn't a perfect system. You did have violence towards Jews, but in the 1800s, you had Jews moving from Europe to Ottoman Palestine because it was better life there. It was with Zionism came an increase in violence because that really was essentially a movement to establish a Jewish homeland on what they view as Palestinian land. So very, very stark increase in violence and tension that came with Zionism. You're saying, Yaakov saying the Gaon of Vilna Aliyah. Yeah, exactly. So my great-grandfather is Moshe Meislish. Chabad, there's a very famous story about him being a spy on Napoleon. We don't need to get into the whole story now, but he's considered a famous rabbi. So he was a student of the Gaon of Vilna. So yeah, Yaakov Mishka saying, you're anti-Zionist. Well, I actually don't identify as anti-Zionist, nor do I identify as Zionist. I think Zionism is a meaningless and confusing term today. If Zionism is just Jews deserving the right to self-determination, then sure, I certainly believe in Jewish self-determination, but I don't think that requires a special term. I support Palestinian self-determination. What does that make me? I support Kurdish self-determination. What does that make me? You don't need a term to support a people's self-determination. If by Zionist you mean I support the state of Israel in its current form, then no, I don't. Right? So often Zionists and anti-Zionists have a different definition of the term, so they're not even having the same conversation with one another. Jews will say it's Jewish self-determination. Anti-Zionists will say it's a form of Jewish supremacy. They're not. That's why it's better to not use a term that's contested and just use language that's agreed upon. Right? So say what you mean. What do you mean? But you're a Zionist. What do you mean? You support Jewish self-determination. Okay. Supporting Jewish self-determination does not necessarily mean you support the state of Israel. So clarify your position, and then we can debate exactly what we mean. Zionism is just a broad term that's highly contested and creates more confusion than it does clarity. So I don't accept either. I just don't accept the term and don't identify as either. Milo says, the point of stressing the refugee description is to make Palestinians more empathetic towards their cousins. Yeah, it's just hard to be empathetic towards somebody who's taking your land and your home and killing your family, right? I do agree with you that reconciliation will be made easier by Palestinians accepting that we are indigenous and came as refugees. Sure. But that's not a realistic expectation of them until we get to a reconciliation process. It's very hard, nearly impossible to have empathy for your enemy or empathy for your oppressor. So I don't see how we could expect that at scale for them to see things this way until we find a just solution and begin some kind of a reconciliation process. Exactly. So Yaakov confirming that, saying, I'm not empathetic towards Palestinians. Exactly, Yaakov. This puts you in the norm, in the majority. There's nothing extreme about that position. You are a human who is involved in an ethnic conflict. Critical thinking over doctrine summarizes it saying description and pragmatic instead of the terms Zionist and anti-Zionist. Yep. So, John, you're saying, I agree if the Palestinians were not offered a state too, I say that violence came before the conditions. No, but again, the offering them a state, it's something I would suggest trying to just look at another conflict where you have less of maybe an emotional connection to. So let's say the early American colonizers said, don't worry, we'll give you half. The rest we're going to take. Would they just say, sure, take half? Who are we to take half? Of course they would reject that. But we'd be much more likely to accept it because we came as these outsiders saying we'll accept anything we can take. So Palestinians accepting partition should not surprise us. That should be expected. I think this is one of the most inaccurate framings of how we view the history of the conflict. It's trying to view us on equal terms. We accepted, they rejected. Therefore, we're more reasonable. But we're coming from very different positions. No population in the history of the world accepted giving half their land or any amount of their land to somebody who just came and took it. And even if the early American colonizers used a lot of the same justification, whether they found some religious justification or say, wait, but they don't have it, they're not a sovereign state, or wait, I could see that it's legal for me to do this. You could use the same justifications to support any form of colonization, but colonizers are always met with violence. That is the norm. It's to be expected. It's never not happened. So to think that Palestinians, like the expectations for Palestinians to just accept Israelis, accept the Jewish state without resistance is expecting of them something that no humans before them have done. So our basis for understanding Israel-Palestine should not be of having an entirely unrealistic expectation of a population. It's just not going to lead us to the right conclusions. So Yaakov, you say, I'm not empathetic towards people who promised to kill my grandfather. I get that. And Palestinians are not empathetic towards the people who killed their grandfather. Yeah. But I get you, Yaakov, but I hope you're able to understand why they struggle to see you in the same way. Okay, let's wrap this up. Oh, thanks for the super chat, Eliashid. Thanks for donating. Eliashid, thanks for the $5. Can you explain the reason Jews chose to colonize a place that would be a financial disaster other than, like, why they chose Israel and not other places? Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, the obvious one being that this is our historic homeland, right? We have a connection to this land. So I think that's probably a pretty straightforward explanation as to why. The other, I think it was opportunistic. We saw that there's the Ottoman Empire is weakening. Is there an opportunity that not only the Ottoman Empire is weakening, the concept of nationhood is increasing globally. There's this global trend. It seemed like there was an opportunity to achieve statehood here, and it actually happened. So it was a good gamble. But is that what you were asking, Ellie? I hope I answered your question. So we have a question from my other cousin, Yadija, is asking if ever in the past the local Arabs have accepted any justice for Jewish land in Israel. I don't know if I understand your question. Maybe throw that in like Google Translate so I could fully understand. So if you're asking, like, have any amount of Palestinians accepted Jewish sovereignty, like a Jewish state? So yeah, I mean, we have seen varying degrees, right? So back to where we're saying, them rejecting Israel should be expected. It shouldn't be expected that they accept. It should be expected that they reject. Any progress we can make from there is great. And we should view it as progress. So when we see Oslo, we shouldn't see Oslo as just a failure. We should see Oslo as progress in the right direction and build on it. The PLO, now the PA, recognizing Israel in 1989, I can't even express how big of an achievement that was for Zionism, if you think about it. You essentially got a population that got more than half their land taken, accepting the existence of that entity. That should be seen as a major victory, but instead it's framed as like, oh, they still aren't happy. No, we need to understand, them not accepting us should be expected. It requires tremendous work to get them to accept us. And that tremendous work is not being done. In fact, we're just focusing more on policies that just continue to radicalize them. So rejection should be expected. Acceptance requires immense work. The work we've done has been, for the most part, counterproductive. I hope that answers your question, Yadidja, but if I didn't, please let me know. Oh, and so again, that's the PA accepting Israel, but also, currently over 50% of Gazans support a two-state solution. During Oslo, over 50% of West Bank Palestinians supported two states. So yeah, you've had varying degrees of support for a two-state solution, and this is while in conflict. The second that there's justice and there's not a conflict, people that de-radicalizes people by default. Not entirely, but like public opinion amongst Palestinians, we see it changes every year. If you change the environmental conditions and create a situation where they don't need to wait at checkpoints and they're not humiliated by home searches and by, again, these checkpoints or being just abused by soldiers, all this makes them more radical. We often say Palestinians understand violence, or that's the language of the Middle East. But more than anything, they understand honor and dignity. And when they're humiliated daily, it radicalizes them. So we have seen there has been acceptance. There has been acceptance. That acceptance will only increase if we can give Palestinians hope and change the environmental conditions on the ground. Now, in terms of if we want one state, if we don't want to give back any of the land, then there's actually some Palestinians that have accepted that as well, but they're not going to accept being second-class citizens. They're not going to accept not having the same rights. So I have seen Palestinians accept one state from the river to the sea, but they say, make me an equal citizen. So I think, we have to make a decision. Either we give Palestinians their own autonomy or we make them equal citizens. I think it's probably better that they have autonomy. I think it's good for them to have their self-determination, whether that's in the form of a federation or confederation. I'm open to the possibilities, but right now they have neither. They don't have equal rights and they don't have freedom, and these are the same conditions that will always produce more violence. Why? Oh, so Eliashid is saying, why would European Jews leave their life in Europe just to colonize a place which would be so foreign and financially disastrous? That's not how colonizers think. Well, I think so there's colonialism and then there's settler colonialism. These are two distinct concepts. Colonialism is when a nation itself sends explorers or soldiers to a new land in order to occupy it and extract the resources for the mother nation, England being a prime example of colonialism. Settler colonialism is generally not for that reason. It's generally one population coming and replacing another population. And when we look at instances of settler colonialism, often it's a result of very horrific conditions where they're living, and they move to a new land to create a better lives for themselves. But there's very little, call it desirable land, that is not occupied by other people. So that's why even if your intention is to go build a better life for yourself, if that better life requires replacing an existing population, we shouldn't expect them to be empathetic towards your struggles. Lul Mao says, if IDF in Israel lies all the time, why even believe what Israeli whistleblowers are saying? I mean, it seems as everything Israel says is bullshit, but their Israeli sources are used. Well, I would say that a whistleblower, an anonymous whistleblower on its own is not enough to know for certain what's happening. Anonymous whistleblowers could generally help corroborate certain things you believe to be true. It's just another data point to paint a fuller picture. But I don't know why we should view the IDF's official narrative to a soldier that decides to go on the record exposing something that their military has done. Neither should be accepted blindly. Both should be supported by other evidence, but I'm not sure why you think these should be viewed the same. Why is Netanyahu arming militias? Yeah, the report came out that we're arming militias in Gaza. Well, I imagine it's probably to create some kind of an alternative to Hamas, to kind of have, to create a force that can challenge them. But I mean, it's very obvious that these militias, they might fight Hamas, but if Israel stays in Gaza, those weapons will then be used against the IDF at some point. These militias are not going to accept Israeli occupation. They might accept the partnership now in order to gain power, but it's not like they're going to just advocate for Israeli occupation of Gaza. Like, that's highly implausible. But I imagine that, JS, I imagine that there's a strategic reason. How could you explain the fact that the first 40 years of Zionism were under Ottoman rule without European backing? I'm not sure why that needs explaining. Was it 40 years? Let's see, 1880s. No, I don't think it's 40 years. I mean, Balfour was in 1917, but that European backing didn't start then. I mean, that's not when European backing started. I think it likely had something to do with shift in control from the Ottoman Empire to it being the British Mandate of Palestine. But I'm not sure why that matters all too much. Maybe you could elaborate. Not sure when you say checkpoints humiliate them, as if it was the only answer they can give. They could very well choose the stoic way or the pacifist way. They do have agency, don't they? Yeah, but Milo, we need to understand that, like, one's agency is limited. Some people, there are some Palestinians that very well may go through checkpoints in a stoic way. But when you impose conditions on an entire population, it's unrealistic to expect all of them to act as outliers. Certain conditions lead people to certain actions or certain beliefs. Once in a while, you'll find an outlier. This idea that you should expect all of them to adopt a stoic and pacifist outlook, and then saying if they don't, then they don't have agency, I don't think that's like interacting with the reality accurately. And I think we could probably find many other examples. It's like, well, like, again, we could use the police brutality thing. It's like, okay, well, people shouldn't commit crime, so, they have agency. Fine. But if the environmental conditions are such that the only way to survive is to commit a crime, or that not the only way to survive, but you're broke and the way to get protection is by joining a gang, sure, you could have agency and find a different way, but in those conditions, some amount of the population are going to act violently, even if it's not the majority. Let's say that these conditions produce 50% indifferent, 40% stoic, 10% violent. That 10% violent population is enough for Israel to justify the security apparatus. So it's not a question of agency. It's understanding that conditions create a certain human outcome consistently, repeatedly. There's no oppressed people in the history of the world that just fully 100% adopted a stoic way of life. And to expect that of them, you could hope it happens. Yeah. Do I wish every Palestinian was a pacifist? Of course. But I mean, I'm trying to grapple with reality for where we're at, and the truth is the majority aren't pacifists, and it's unrealistic to expect them to be. It's almost like, Milo, let me flip this around, okay? Imagine if many people think all Israelis are guilty. Why we keep voting for Netanyahu? We support what's happening in Gaza. Many would say Israelis, don't they have agency? Can't they vote for a better leadership? Can't they solve the conflict? Where's all their agency? Why don't they care more about Palestinians? Yeah, they have agency. They could adopt a more pacifist outlook, but given the conditions that Israelis are raised in, it's unrealistic to expect Israel to be a nation of pacifists. And that has nothing to do with their agency. It's just grappling with reality. Let's see, anything else? Okay, we're gonna bring this over to Discord. I do have a call in 40 minutes, so it will be short and sweet. So guys, we're gonna do an after party on Discord. I'm gonna drop a link. You join, and then you'll see on the left-hand side, it says live stream after party. Once you join the live stream after party, or actually it's gonna say, just go in the chill room. It says chill room, you click on chill room, and then you'll be connected via voice/video. You don't need to show your face, you don't need to speak, but it's kind of just like a community session where everybody can chat and get to know one another, ask questions. And by the way, we're hosting conversations almost daily between Israelis, Palestinians, and people from all over the world on Discord. They're super inspiring, so I invite you all to join. For those viewing this on Twitter and not on YouTube, if you go to my profile, you'll see a link to Discord. And if you're here on YouTube, you'll either see it in the description or here in chat where I just dropped it. And with that, friends, signing off. See you next week for another stream.